Some places hold on to things they were never meant to keep. 10. Sleep. Wyoming sits at the western base of the Bighorn Mountains, a town of fewer than 300 souls named for the Sioux measurement of distance, 10 nights' travel from significant landmarks in either direction. The town exists in a kind of geographic pause, a place travelers pass through on their way to somewhere else. Highway 16 winds through it like a ribbon laid carelessly across the high plains, connecting Worland to the west and Buffalo to the east, with nothing but sagebrush and silence in between. The Bighorns rise sharply to the east, their peaks often shrouded in weather that moves faster than forecasts can track. In winter, the canyon roads become treacherous. Whiteouts arrive without warning. Emergency services from Worland or Buffalo can take hours to respond, assuming they're called at all. The isolation is not metaphorical here. It is measured in miles, in frozen fuel lines, in the time it takes for sound to carry across an empty valley and reach no one. 10 Sleep has never been a destination. It has always been a waypoint, a place to fuel up, stretch tired legs, and continue on. The few businesses that survive there do so by serving those in transit. The Elkhorn Diner, which closed permanently in 2003, was one such establishment, a low-slung building with fogged windows and a gravel lot that could hold maybe 12 vehicles. It served coffee, eggs, and hamburgers to truckers and families who wouldn't remember its name by the time they crossed the state line. But someone remembered it. Someone always does. On the evening of December 11, 1987, a brown 1983 Ford Country Squire station wagon pulled into the Elkhorn Diner's parking lot at approximately 7:30 in the evening. The vehicle bore Nebraska plates. Inside were 5 members of the Lindquist family: Gerald, 44, a sales manager from Omaha, his wife Patricia, 41, and their 3 children, Eric, 17, Dana, 14, and Michael, 9. The Lindquists were driving from Omaha to Seattle to spend the holidays with Patricia's sister. They had left that morning, planning to stop overnight in Billings, Montana. 10 Sleep was not on their itinerary. No one knows why they stopped there or why Gerald chose that particular diner on that particular night. The family had made no phone calls since departing Omaha. Their last confirmed sighting was at a gas station in Casper at 4:12 that afternoon, captured on a security camera that showed all 5 members entering the convenience store together. 3 hours later, they arrived in 10 Sleep. The diner's register recorded a transaction at 7:42, one check totaling $23.15, paid in cash. The order, reconstructed later from handwritten tickets, included 2 cheeseburgers, 1 chicken fried steak, 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, 3 Coca-Colas, and 2 coffees, 5 plates, 5 drinks, a meal for a family of 5. But according to Dolores Finch, the 61-year-old owner and sole employee working that evening, no one came into the diner at all. Finch was interviewed by Washakie County deputies on December 13th, after a highway patrolman noticed the Ford station wagon still parked in the lot during a routine pass. The engine, when checked, was warm to the touch, unusual for a vehicle that had supposedly sat in below freezing temperatures for over 40 hours. The doors were unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. Inside, 5 winter coats hung neatly on the hooks beside the rear seats. Finch told deputies she had worked the evening shift alone on December 11th. Business had been slow, only 2 customers all night, both of them truckers who'd paid and left before 7. She remembered closing early, around 8:30, because the weather was turning. She had wiped down the counter, locked the register, and gone home. She did not recall any brown station wagon in the lot. When shown the register tape with the 7:42 transaction, Finch became visibly confused. The handwriting on the order ticket, she admitted, looked like hers. The food had been prepared. 5 plates were found on a back booth table 2 days later, untouched, as if the diners had simply stood up mid-meal and walked away. The coffee was still in the cups, a thin film of mold beginning to form on the surface. "I don't know how to explain it," Finch said in a recorded statement. "I was there. I remember that night. I would have seen them come in. I would have seen a family. I would have seen children." She paused before adding, "There wasn't anyone." Dolores Finch passed away in 1994. In the years following her interview, she gave only one other public statement, to a local reporter in 1989 who was writing a retrospective on the case. Her account had not changed, but she added a detail she hadn't mentioned before. "The bell," she said, "the bell above the door. It rings when someone comes in. I heard it that night. I remember hearing it. But when I looked up, there wasn't anyone there." The Washakie County Sheriff's Office opened a missing persons investigation on December 14, 1987. Search teams were dispatched into the surrounding area. Helicopters surveyed the canyon roads. Dogs were brought in from Cody. The search continued for 11 days before being scaled back due to weather. No bodies were recovered, no clothing, no personal effects. The family's luggage remained in the back of the station wagon, undisturbed. Gerald Lindquist's wallet was found on the dashboard, containing $87 in cash and a family photograph. Patricia's purse was on the passenger seat, her driver's license and credit cards still inside. Eric's Walkman was on the floor of the back seat, headphones still plugged in, the tape inside frozen mid-song, side A of Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, stopped at the 4-minute mark of I'm on Fire. Investigators contacted motels in the region, gas stations, rest stops. No one had seen the Lindquists after the Casper sighting. The 3-hour window between 4:12 and 7:30 remained unaccounted for, a gap that should have covered roughly 200 miles, but instead delivered the family to a diner only 120 miles away, with no explanation for the missing time or distance. In early 1988, the FBI briefly assisted with the case at the request of Nebraska authorities. Their involvement lasted 6 weeks. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2001 revealed that the Bureau's file on the Lindquist family had been partially redacted, with 7 pages removed entirely under exemptions related to national security and confidential source information. No further explanation was provided. A retired Bureau analyst, speaking anonymously to a podcast producer in 2017, said only this: "There are cases you close because you solve them. There are cases you close because someone tells you to. And there are cases you close because continuing to look starts to feel like a mistake." The Elkhorn Diner was sold in 1990 and changed hands twice more before closing for good. The building was demolished in 2009. A small plaque was proposed by a local historical society to mark the site, but the motion was voted down by the Ten Sleep Town Council. No reason was recorded in the minutes. The Lindquist station wagon was impounded and eventually released to Gerald's brother in 1989. He reportedly had it crushed without ever driving it. Patricia's sister in Seattle held a memorial service in 1988, though no remains were present. The family was never declared dead. Under Nebraska law at the time, a person could not be presumed deceased without a body or evidence of fatal harm. The Lindquists remain, legally, missing. A hiker passing through Ten Sleep in 2014 reported an unusual experience while refueling at the town's only gas station. He mentioned the Lindquist case to the attendant, an elderly man who had lived in the area his whole life. The attendant listened, then said nothing for a long moment. "You're not the first to ask about that," he said finally. "But you should know, some folks around here don't talk about it, not because they don't remember, because they remember too much." When pressed for details, the attendant declined to elaborate. He did, however, offer one observation. "That diner's been gone 15 years now," he said, "but every once in a while, late at night, Someone driving through swears they still see the lights on. The Lindquist family has never been found. The register tape from December 11, 1987, remains in the Washakie County Evidence Archive. 5 meals ordered, 5 meals served, and no one to remember who ate them or who didn't. There are trails in the Bridger Teton that lead nowhere anyone should want to go. The Bridger Teton National Forest sprawls across 3.4 million acres of western Wyoming, making it the third largest national forest in the lower 48 states. Its terrain is unforgiving: glacial valleys, alpine lakes, and peaks that rise above 13,000 feet. Grizzlies move through its backcountry. Wolves have returned to its northern corridors. In winter, entire sections become impassable. In summer, the Forest Service struggles to maintain contact with rangers stationed in its most remote quadrants. The Gros Ventre Wilderness, a portion of the forest east of Jackson Hole, is particularly isolated. Named for the French term meaning big belly, a reference to the Atsina people who once lived there, the wilderness area covers 287,000 acres with no maintained roads, no cell coverage, and limited radio relay. Rangers assigned to the Gros Ventre work alone for weeks at a time. They carry satellite beacons for emergencies, but the canyon walls often block transmissions. The Forest Service Handbook describes the region as operationally challenging. Rangers who've worked there use other words. Dale Whitmore was 41 years old in the summer of 2003. He had worked for the National Park Service and later the U.S. Forest Service for 18 years, with postings in Montana, Idaho, and Northern California, before transferring to the Bridger Teton in 1998. Colleagues described him as steady, experienced, and notably self-sufficient, qualities that made him well-suited for backcountry assignments. He had requested the Gros Ventre Station specifically. He preferred the solitude. On July 14, 2003, Whitmore departed the Crystal Creek Ranger Cabin for a routine patrol of the upper Gros Ventre drainage. His planned route would take him northeast along Slate Creek, then loop back via an unmaintained trail known locally as the Soda Fork Cutoff. The round trip was approximately 26 miles, a 2-day hike at moderate pace. He was expected to check in by radio on the evening of July 15th and return to the cabin by the 16th. At 6:47 in the evening on July 15th, Whitmore made contact with the Teton Interagency Dispatch Center. The transmission was brief and unremarkable. He reported his position as approximately 4 miles southwest of Darwin Peak, noted clear weather and good trail conditions, and confirmed he was heading back to Crystal Creek. The dispatcher logged the call as routine. Whitmore signed off at 6:49. He was never heard from again. When Whitmore failed to return by the afternoon of July 17th, a search was initiated. 2 rangers from the Jackson district hiked to the Crystal Creek cabin and found it undisturbed. His personal vehicle was still parked at the trailhead. His backup radio and emergency beacon remained in the cabin, unused. A ground search began the following morning, with air support arriving on July 19th. The first significant discovery came on July 20th, when a tracking team located Whitmore's boot prints approximately 2 miles east of his last reported position. The prints were clear in the soft earth along a seasonal drainage. They matched the tread pattern of his issued footwear. They were facing the wrong direction. Ranger Marcus Trujillo, a 15-year veteran who led the tracking team, later described what they found in a formal incident report. The prints indicated a backward gait, he wrote. Heel-to-toe impression was reversed. Stride length was consistent, approximately 28 inches. There were no signs of dragging, stumbling, or irregular movement. The subject appeared to be walking in reverse, deliberately and steadily, away from his stated destination. The team followed the tracks for 11.3 miles through increasingly rugged terrain. The path led up a steep drainage, across 2 unmarked ridgelines, and into a high meadow at an elevation of approximately 9,600 feet. The meadow sat in a shallow bowl surrounded by spruce and whitebark pine. There was no trail access, no reason for anyone to go there. At the center of the meadow, the track stopped. There was no sign of a fall, no indication of an animal encounter, no evidence that Whitmore had turned around, continued forward, or left the area by any means. The grass at the termination point was undisturbed. A single depression in the soil suggested he had stood in that spot for some time, long enough for his weight to compress the earth. But there was nothing to indicate where he went next. 47 feet away, hanging from a low spruce branch at eye level, searchers found Whitmore's radio. It was switched on, tuned to the correct dispatch frequency, and transmitting a faint static hiss. The battery was nearly depleted. The push-to-talk button showed no fingerprints, wiped clean, or never touched. No other equipment was recovered. Whitmore's pack, GPS unit, water bottles, and service weapon were never found. The incident report filed by Teton Interagency was 11 pages long and concluded with the classification missing under unknown circumstances. It noted several anomalies that remained unexplained. First, the direction of travel. Whitmore's last radio contact placed him southwest of Darwin Peak, heading back toward Crystal Creek, which lay to the southwest. The backward tracks moved northeast, deeper into the wilderness, away from any logical destination. Second, the distance. 11 miles of continuous backward walking over rough and uneven ground would require extraordinary physical effort and spatial awareness. Whitmore would have been unable to see obstacles ahead of him, yet the tracks showed no deviation, no stumbles, no corrections. Third, the meadow. Forest Service maps from 1978 and 1991 show the location where the tracks terminated, but a revised survey conducted in 2005 found a discrepancy. The meadow was approximately 300 feet lower in elevation than the earlier maps indicated, a difference too significant to be attributed to erosion or cartographic error. The survey team noted the anomaly but offered no explanation. Colleagues who knew Whitmore struggled to reconcile the evidence with the man they remembered. He was described as methodical, safety-conscious, and deeply familiar with the terrain. He had no history of mental illness, no recent personal difficulties, and no reason to abandon his post. Rebecca Whitmore, his younger sister, traveled from Colorado to assist with the search. In an interview with a Jackson Hole newspaper in August of 2003, she said only this: "Dale didn't get lost. Dale didn't panic. Whatever happened out there, it wasn't something he did to himself." She declined to comment on the backward tracks. When asked if she believed her brother was still alive, she paused for nearly 10 seconds before responding. "I don't know what I believe anymore," she said, "but I know he didn't walk into that meadow to disappear. Something made him go there." The search was officially suspended on August 1st, 2003, after 19 days. Over 200 personnel had participated, covering more than 400 square miles by air and ground. No remains were found. No further evidence was recovered. In 2006, the Forest Service quietly removed the Crystal Creek Ranger cabin from active use. The official reason cited was structural concerns, though an inspection report from 2004 had rated the cabin as sound. Rangers reassigned from the Gros Ventre district reported being discouraged from discussing the Whitmore case with the press or the public. One such ranger, who asked to remain anonymous, spoke briefly with a documentary researcher in 2011. "There's a story that gets passed around," he said, "about a meadow up in the Gros Ventre that doesn't match the maps, about a ranger who walked into it backward and never came out. The old-timers say you can still hear static up there sometimes, like someone's trying to broadcast, but there's no one on the other end." He hesitated, then added, "I've never gone looking for it. I don't think anyone has, not on purpose." Dale Whitmore was declared legally dead in 2010, 7 years after his disappearance. His name was added to a memorial wall at the National Conservation Training Center in West Virginia, alongside other federal land management employees who died in the line of duty. But his body was never found. His path was never explained. And the meadow where his tracks ended remains, as far as anyone knows, exactly where it was, waiting in the silence at 9,600 feet, with the grass bent slightly inward, as if something heavy once stood there and then simply ceased to exist. The radio was returned to his sister. She kept it in a drawer for years, unable to throw it away. In 2015, she noticed something she hadn't seen before: a thin scratch on the casing, forming a shape that might have been a letter or might have been nothing at all. She never reported it. Some details, she decided, were better left unspoken. Some photographs show things that were never there to be seen. Kerwin sits at nearly 9,500 feet in the Absaroka Range, tucked into a narrow valley where the Wood River bends sharply beneath peaks that hold snow well into July. To reach it, you must drive 26 miles of unpaved road from the town of Mititsa, the last 8 miles passable only by high-clearance vehicle or foot. There is no cell service, no running water, no permanent residence. The Forest Service maintains a single interpretive sign at the trailhead, and even that seems uncertain of its purpose. The town was founded in 1897 during a brief gold rush that never delivered on its promises. By 1905, the population had dwindled to fewer than 50. A catastrophic avalanche in 1907 killed 3 miners and destroyed several structures. Within 2 years, the remaining residents had abandoned the site entirely. The post office closed. The power lines, never completed, were dismantled for salvage. Kerwin became what it remains today: a handful of collapsing cabins, a few rusted artifacts, and silence. The Forest Service nominally manages the site as a historical landmark, though budget constraints have limited preservation efforts. Hikers occasionally visit during summer months, drawn by the remoteness and the strange melancholy of a place that time forgot. Most take photographs of the decaying structures, the wildflowers pushing through rotted floorboards, the mountains rising indifferently beyond. They leave before dark. Almost everyone leaves before dark. In August of 2011, a hiker named Thomas Erickson was exploring the eastern edge of the town site when he noticed something unusual in one of the smaller cabins. Erickson, a 36-year-old amateur historian from Cody, had visited Kerwin several times before and was familiar with its layout. The cabin in question, a one-room structure believed to have been a storage shed, was partially collapsed, its roof caved in on the northern side. Inside, half buried under debris and decades of accumulated dust, Erickson found a leather camera case. The case contained an Argus C3, a popular rangefinder camera manufactured between 1939 and 1966. The body was heavily weathered, the leather grip cracked and peeling, but the mechanism appeared intact. Most significantly, the film advance lever still moved. Erickson carefully extracted the camera and noted that the frame counter indicated 17 exposures had been taken. The roll was not fully advanced. 1 frame remained. Erickson did not attempt to open the camera in the field. He wrapped it in his jacket and hiked back to Mititsa, where he placed it in a dark bag and drove to a specialty photo lab in Billings, Montana. The lab, one of few remaining facilities in the region capable of processing vintage film stock, agreed to attempt development despite the unknown age and storage conditions of the film. 3 weeks later, Erickson received a phone call from the lab's owner, a man named Vincent Howell. "I've been doing this for 32 years, Howell said, according to Erickson's later account. "I've developed film from attics, basements, estate sales. I've seen water damage, heat damage, mold. But I've never seen anything like this." The film had yielded 17 printable images. All 17 showed the same subject, the main street of Kirwin, photographed from a fixed position approximately 40 feet from the nearest structure. The angle was consistent across all frames. The time of day appeared to be late afternoon, based on shadow length. The street was empty. What disturbed Howell, and what would later disturb everyone who examined the photographs, was the progression. The first 16 images were nearly identical. The same collapsed storefronts, the same overgrown path, the same distant ridgeline. Minor variations in cloud position suggested the photographs had been taken in rapid succession, perhaps seconds apart. There was nothing unusual about them except their redundancy. 16 photographs of nothing repeated. The 17th image was different. In the final frame, taken from the same position at the same angle, every window in Kirwin, the glassless frames of the old assay office, the dark rectangles of the general store, the narrow openings of the miner's bunkhouse, contained a visible light source, small, flickering, orange-yellow, candles, 17 windows, 17 flames, burning in a town that had been dead for over a century. Erickson shared the photographs with the Park County Historical Society in 2012. The Society's director, a woman named Margaret Ostrander, examined the prints and the negatives under magnification. Her written assessment was clinical, but included one notable observation. The light sources are consistent with open flame illumination, she wrote. They do not appear to be reflections, lens artifacts, or post-exposure contamination. If these are candles, they were physically present at the time of exposure. She added, I have no explanation for how this is possible. The camera itself offered few clues. The Argus C3 was a common model, with millions produced over 3 decades. The serial number, still faintly visible on the base plate, corresponded to a manufacturing run from 1943. Who had owned it when it had arrived in Kirwin and who had taken the photographs remained unknown. The cabin where Erickson found the camera was surveyed by a Forest Service archaeologist in 2013. The debris covering the camera case included rotted timber, rusted nails, and fragments of 1920s-era newspaper, suggesting the camera had been buried for at least 80 years. There were no other personal effects, no identification, no indication of who might have left it there or why. Local historians attempted to trace any documented visitors to Kirwin between 1940 and 1950, the most likely period of the photographs based on the film stock. Records were sparse. A handful of hunters, a few geological surveyors, and one group of university students conducting a botanical study in 1947. None reported anything unusual, none mentioned photography. The Shoshone and Arapaho communities, whose ancestral lands include parts of the Absaroka Range, have their own understanding of Kirwin, though few speak of it publicly. A cultural liaison interviewed in 2014 acknowledged that the area had a reputation among tribal elders. There are places where the land remembers things that didn't happen, she said, or maybe they happened somewhere else, some other time. The old people say you shouldn't take pictures in those places. The camera sees what you can't. When asked about the candles in the final photograph, she declined to comment directly. She said only, "Fire means someone is home, but not everyone who lights a candle is someone you want to meet." The photographs were exhibited briefly at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody in 2015, as part of a display on Wyoming ghost towns. Visitor response was mixed. Some dismissed the final image as a hoax or a double exposure. Others lingered in front of it longer than the other prints, unable to articulate what unsettled them. Erickson, who retained ownership of the camera and negatives, stopped giving interviews after 2016. In his last public statement, he mentioned that he had returned to Kirwin twice since his discovery, once in 2012, once in 2014. Both times, he said, he had felt watched, though he saw no one. "I stood in the same spot," he said. right where those pictures were taken. I counted the windows, 17. I don't know why I counted, I just needed to be sure. He paused. They were all dark, but I kept thinking, if I waited long enough, maybe they wouldn't be. The camera remains in Erickson's possession. The final frame, with its 17 impossible flames, has never been explained. The film was tested for tampering and found to be authentic. The negatives show no evidence of manipulation. In Kerwin, the cabins continue to decay. The windows remain empty, open to the wind and the slow work of seasons. No one has reported seeing lights there since Erickson's discovery, though few people visit after dark and fewer still bring cameras. Some things, perhaps, prefer not to be photographed twice. Some warnings are written in places no one is meant to look. The U.S. Geological Survey has been mapping American terrain since 1879, producing millions of topographic quadrangles that document every ridge, drainage, and elevation change across the continent. These maps are instruments of precision, created by teams of surveyors, cartographers, and engineers working under strict federal protocols. They are not places for personal commentary. They are not spaces for doubt, which is why the note on survey map WY7714, Quad Series 1953 Edition 1, should not exist. The map covers a remote section of the Great Divide Basin in south-central Wyoming, an area of high desert plateau between the Wind River Range and the Ferris Mountains. The basin is one of the few endorheic watersheds in North America. Water that falls there neither reaches the Atlantic nor the Pacific, but simply vanishes into the alkali flats, evaporating under a sky that offers no shade. The terrain is sparse, wind-scoured, and largely featureless. Even by Wyoming standards, it is empty. Grid 714D occupies the northeastern quadrant of the map, corresponding to approximately 36 square miles of undeveloped federal land. The grid contains no towns, no roads, and no named geographic features. On the 1953 edition, it is rendered in the standard brown contour lines and blue seasonal drainages common to USGS products of that era. There is nothing visually remarkable about it, except for the margin. In the lower right corner, outside the printed border, but within the paper's edge, someone wrote 7 words in pencil. Do not send anyone to grid 7-14-D after November. The handwriting is small, neat, and slanted slightly to the right. It was not part of the original printing. It does not appear on any other copy of the same edition. And no record exists in USGS archives, personnel files, or internal correspondence of who wrote it, when, or why. The note was first discovered in 1987 by a graduate student at the University of Wyoming named Patricia Linden. Linden was conducting archival research on mid-century federal land surveys for her dissertation on Cold War-era resource mapping. She had requested the 1953 quadrangle as part of a batch of regional documents and noticed the annotation while cross-referencing grid coordinates. It stopped me cold, she later wrote, in a footnote that was removed from her final dissertation at her advisor's recommendation. Survey maps are sacrosanct. You don't write on them, you don't annotate them, and you certainly don't leave warnings. Linden attempted to trace the note's origin through official channels. The USGS Records Office in Reston, Virginia, confirmed that the map had been printed in April of 1953 and distributed to regional field offices in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. It had passed through at least 4 hands before being archived at the Wyoming State Geological Survey in 1967. None of the documented handlers had reported the annotation. More troubling was what Linden found when she examined the survey assignments for Grid 714D in the years following the map's publication. Between 1954 and 1961, 3 surveyors were dispatched to the grid as part of routine topographic verification work. All three resigned from the USGS within weeks of completing their assignments. None provided detailed explanations. Their personnel files, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 1991, contained only the standard separation paperwork and brief exit interview summaries. The first surveyor, a man named Howard Jessup, was assigned to Grid 714D in October of 1954. His field notes for the assignment are missing from the archive. His exit interview, conducted in December of that year, consists of a single typed paragraph stating that Jessup had decided to pursue other opportunities and did not wish to discuss his reasons. He died in 1978 in Albuquerque. His family could not be located for comment. The second surveyor, Franklin Loomis, visited the grid in September of 1957. His field notes survive, but contain an unusual gap. Pages 14 through 18 are missing, apparently removed by hand, with clean edges that suggest deliberate excision rather than damage. Loomis resigned in November of 1957. In his exit interview, he stated only that he had lost confidence in the work and requested that his name be removed from any pending publications. He relocated to Oregon and worked as a high school geography teacher until his retirement in 1989. He declined all interview requests related to his USGS tenure. The third surveyor, a woman named Dorothy Marsh, was assigned to Grid 714D in August of 1961. Unlike her predecessors, Marsh's field notes are complete, but they contain a detail that no other USGS document from that era corroborates. On the final page, in handwriting that matches the margin note on the original map, Marsh wrote, "Resurvey confirms previous readings. Elevation discrepancy in NE sector remains unexplained. Recommend discontinuation of Grid 7-14-D assignments." Marsh resigned in September of 1961. Her exit interview is the longest of the three, spanning 2 pages, but much of the content was redacted prior to archival. The visible portions reference personal health concerns and irreconcilable data. She returned to her hometown of Duluth, Minnesota, and worked for the State Transportation Department until 1983. She passed away in 2002 without ever speaking publicly about her time in Wyoming. Patricia Linden's attempts to visit Grid 714D in person were unsuccessful. In the summer of 1988, she drove to the approximate coordinates and found the access road gated and marked with Bureau of Land Management signage indicating no public access, resource management area. She contacted the BLM field office in Rawlins, but was told that the closure was related to ongoing environmental assessments and that no timeline for reopening was available. The gate remains in place today. Satellite imagery of the grid, available since the early 2000s, shows nothing unusual: flat terrain, sparse vegetation, dry washes. But there is one anomaly that cartographers have noted without explanation. On every USGS topographic map produced since 1963, Grid 714D has been omitted from the standard quadrangle series. The surrounding grids are present. The coordinates exist. But the grid itself appears only on older editions, and even those have become difficult to locate in public archives. A retired USGS cartographer named Bernard Halsey, interviewed in 2009 for an obscure geography journal, acknowledged that the omission was intentional, but claimed not to know the reason. "There are places we stop mapping," he said, "not because there's nothing there, because someone decided it was better not to look." When asked about the margin note, Halsey paused for a long moment. "I've heard the story," he said. "We all have, but nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to be the one who asks why." The original 1953 map with the handwritten warning remains in the University of Wyoming's archive, housed in a climate-controlled storage facility in Laramie. It is not available for public viewing. Researchers who request access are told that the document is under preservation review and that no date for reclassification has been set. Linden completed her dissertation in 1990 and went on to teach at a small college in Vermont. She never published the footnote about the margin note. In a letter to a colleague in 2001, she explained her reasoning. "Some things don't belong in academic papers," she wrote, "not because they aren't true, because proving them would require going somewhere I don't think anyone should go." She added in a postscript, "I still think about Dorothy Marsh. I think about what she saw that made her write that note. And I think about the fact that she didn't warn people to stay away forever. Just after November. No one has explained what happens in Grid 714D after November. No one has explained why the warning was necessary, or who it was meant to protect. The note remains on the map, in pencil, in handwriting that belongs to no one. And November every year comes and goes in silence." There are roads in Wyoming where the distance between 2 points cannot be measured in miles alone. U.S. Route 287 runs northwest from Rawlins through some of the most isolated terrain in the continental United States. For long stretches, there is nothing. No towns, no gas stations, no structures of any kind. The land is high desert, sage-covered and wind-stripped, with the Wind River Range rising to the north like a wall between the present and something older. Drivers who travel this route at night often report a sensation of displacement, as though the road itself has stretched beyond its mapped length. Most dismiss the feeling as fatigue. Most do not stop to investigate. Jeffrey City sits roughly halfway between Rawlins and Lander, a company town built in the 1950s to support uranium mining operations. At its peak in the late 70s, the population approached 5,000. By 1983, the uranium market had collapsed, and Jeffrey City became one of the fastest shrinking towns in American history. Today, fewer than 60 people remain. The old mining facilities stand empty. The motel still operates, though guests are rare. The town exists in a kind of suspended decay, neither alive nor fully abandoned. In the autumn of 1979, Jeffrey City was still thriving, or at least functioning. The Greyhound station, a small cinder block building on the main road, served as a waypoint for buses traveling between Casper and Rock Springs. Most through passengers never stepped off. They simply waited while the driver refueled, then continued on. It was not a place people came to. It was a place people passed through. On the evening of October 17, 1979, Greyhound bus number 7742 departed Casper at 6:15, bound for Rock Springs with scheduled stops in Muddy Gap and Jeffrey City. The bus carried 19 passengers according to the manifest filed with the Casper terminal. The driver was a man named Earl Weber, 53 years old, a 17-year employee of Greyhound Lines with an unblemished safety record. The weather was clear, the roads were dry. There was no reason to expect anything unusual. The bus was due in Jeffrey City at approximately 9:30. It did not arrive until 1:47 in the morning. The station attendant on duty that night, a 24-year-old named Samuel Okonkwo, later described what he witnessed in a written statement provided to Fremont County investigators. "I heard the bus before I saw it," he wrote. "The engine was running rough, like it was straining. When it pulled into the lot, it came in slow, maybe 5 miles per hour. It stopped at the fuel island, but the driver didn't get out. I waited a few minutes, then walked over." Okonkwo approached the bus and knocked on the door. There was no response. He could see Weber through the glass, seated in the driver's position, hands on the wheel, eyes open. The interior lights were off, but the dashboard instruments were illuminated. Okonkwo knocked again. Weber did not move. After several minutes, Okonkwo used the exterior release to open the door. He stepped aboard and found the bus empty. All 19 passenger seats showed signs of recent occupation. The fabric was warm to the touch. Personal items remained in place. A paperback novel on seat 7, a child-stuffed rabbit on seat 12, a half-eaten bag of peanuts on seat 15. The overhead compartments contained luggage, suitcases, duffel bags, a guitar case. A woman's purse sat on the floor near the rear exit, its contents undisturbed. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of forced removal, no evidence that anyone had exited the vehicle in haste. The passengers were simply gone. Weber remained unresponsive for nearly 20 minutes. When he finally spoke, his first words, according to Okonkwo, were, "Did we cross the river yet?" He was referring to the Sweetwater River, a shallow waterway that Route 287 crosses approximately 40 miles southeast of Jeffrey City. Under normal conditions, the crossing would have occurred around 7:45 that evening, 6 hours before the bus arrived at the station. Weber had no memory of anything that happened after that point. He was transported to the Lander Valley Medical Center, where physicians found no evidence of stroke, seizure, or intoxication. His vital signs were normal. His cognitive function, apart from the memory gap, appeared intact. He was held for observation for 3 days and released with no diagnosis. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office initiated a search for the missing passengers on the morning of October 18th. Deputies canvassed the route between the Sweetwater Crossing and Jeffrey City, covering more than 60 miles of highway and surrounding terrain. Helicopters surveyed the area from the air. Tracking dogs were brought in from Riverton. Nothing was found. No bodies, no clothing, no footprints leading away from the road. The passengers had vanished as though they had never boarded the bus at all, except that the manifest, the luggage, and the still warm seats confirmed they had. Greyhound's internal investigation, conducted in November of 1979, produced a 43-page report that was never released to the public. A partial summary, obtained through a legal discovery process in an unrelated civil case in 1986, contained several findings that raised more questions than they answered. First, the bus's odometer showed a discrepancy. The distance from Casper to Jeffrey City via the scheduled route was approximately 140 miles. The odometer recorded 217 miles traveled, 77 miles more than the route required. Second, the fuel consumption was inconsistent. The bus had been filled in Casper and should have arrived in Jeffrey City with at least half a tank remaining. It arrived nearly empty, as though it had been running continuously for far longer than 4 hours. Third, and most troubling, the bus's radio log showed no transmissions after 7:38, the approximate time of the Sweetwater crossing. Standard protocol required drivers to check in at each scheduled stop and report any delays. Weber made no such reports. When asked why, he said he did not remember picking up the radio. The manifest listed 19 names. Investigators contacted families and employers to verify identities and establish timelines. 14 of the passengers were confirmed through ticket purchases and witness statements. 5 could not be independently verified. Their names appeared on the manifest, but no records of their existence could be found. No driver's licenses, no social security numbers, no family members who recognized their descriptions. One investigator, a deputy named Richard Fontaine, noted this anomaly in his personal notes, which were donated to the Wyoming State Archives after his death in 2004. 14 real people got on that bus, he wrote. 19 names were on the list. Where did the other 5 come from, and where did any of them go? Earl Weber never drove for Greyhound again. He took a medical leave in November of 1979 and formally resigned in January of 1980. He moved to Arizona and worked as a maintenance supervisor at a retirement community until his death in 1997. He gave only one interview about the incident to a local newspaper in 1984 and said little of substance. "I've driven that road 100 times," he said. "I know every mile of it. But that night I crossed the river and then I was somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't on the map. And when I came back, they were gone. When asked where he thought the passengers had gone, Weber shook his head. "I don't think they went anywhere," he said. "I think they're still there, wherever there is." The luggage recovered from the bus was held in evidence storage for 7 years, then released to Greyhound, which reportedly destroyed it in accordance with company policy. The manifest was archived with the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. The case was officially closed in 1985, classified as Unresolved Missing Persons, Multiple. Jeffrey City continued its slow decline. The Greyhound station closed in 1982. The building was demolished in 1991. Today, nothing marks the spot where Bus 7742 arrived 4 hours late, with its seats still warm and its passengers erased from the world. But old-timers in Jeffrey City still talk about it, in the way people talk about things they'd rather not remember. They talk about the bus that came in from the dark. They talk about the driver who couldn't remember. And they talk about the 19 people who got on in Casper and never got off anywhere. Some say the road took them. Some say they were never really there to begin with. And some, when the wind blows just right across the empty highway, say they can still hear the engine, running rough, somewhere out in the sage, on a road that doesn't appear on any map. Some people leave without ever being seen going. Cokeville, Wyoming, lies in the far southwestern corner of the state, pressed against the Idaho border in a narrow valley where the Bear River curves through cattle country. The town has never been large, fewer than 600 people today, and not many more in the early 1960s. It is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where doors go unlocked, where children walk to school without supervision because there is nowhere dangerous to go, or so people believed. The town's main street runs for approximately 4 blocks, lined with the modest infrastructure of rural American life: a grocery store, a feed supply, a small diner, and the United States Post Office, a single-story brick building constructed in 1938. The post office served not only Cokeville, but the surrounding ranches, and in 1962 it was managed by a man named Vernon Sweeney, who had held the position since returning from the war in 1946. Sweeney was known for his punctuality. He opened the office at 8 every morning and locked it at 5 every evening without variation for 16 years. On the afternoon of September 14, 1962, that routine was interrupted in a way no one in Cokeville has ever been able to explain. Mary and June Fielding were 12 years old, identical twins born 7 minutes apart on a January morning in 1950. Their father, Donald Fielding, worked as a foreman at a nearby sheep ranch. Their mother, Vera, kept house and did seamstress work for neighbors. The family attended the local Methodist church. The girls were known as quiet, well-behaved, and inseparable, the kind of children who finished each other's sentences and seemed to communicate without speaking. At approximately 4:30 on that Friday afternoon, Mary and June asked their mother if they could walk to the post office to mail a letter. The letter was addressed to their grandmother in Montpelier, Idaho, and contained drawings the girls had made for her birthday. Vera Fielding agreed. The post office was 2 blocks away. The girls had made the walk dozens of times before. 3 witnesses saw the Fielding sisters enter the post office that afternoon. The first was Clarence Muir, a retired rancher who was sitting on a bench outside the hardware store across the street. He later told investigators he saw 2 girls in matching blue dresses walk up the post office steps and push open the front door. He remembered thinking they looked like mirror images of each other. The second witness was Delphine Nyquist, a housewife who was walking her dog on the opposite sidewalk. She saw the girls from behind as they entered the building. She noted that one of them, she couldn't say which, paused at the threshold and looked back over her shoulder as if she had heard something. Then both girls went inside. The third witness was Vernon Sweeney himself. In his written statement to the Lincoln County Sheriff, He confirmed that Mary and June Fielding entered the post office at approximately 4:35. He remembered them because they were regulars and because June had asked him how much it cost to mail a postcard to heaven. He had smiled and told her he didn't think the postal service delivered there. The girls had laughed. Then they had walked to the counter to purchase stamps. That was the last time anyone saw them. Sweeney stated that he turned away to retrieve a roll of stamps from the back cabinet, a task that took no more than 30 seconds. When he turned back, the girls were gone. He assumed they had left while his back was turned. He thought nothing of it. He closed the office at 5 o'clock as usual and went home. Vera Fielding began to worry when the girls had not returned by 6. She walked to the post office and found it closed. She asked neighbors if anyone had seen her daughters. No one had, at least not since they entered the building. By 8 o'clock, Donald Fielding had contacted the sheriff. By midnight, a search was underway. The post office was unlocked the following morning by Vernon Sweeney, accompanied by 2 deputies. What they found inside would become the subject of speculation for decades. The building was empty. The doors and windows were secure. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication of struggle, no evidence that anyone had left through any exit. But near the front counter, arranged side by side on the wooden floor, were 2 pairs of small brown shoes. They were Mary and June's shoes. Vera Fielding identified them immediately. They had been placed neatly, toes pointing toward the counter, as though the girls had stepped out of them with care. The laces were still tied. Beside the shoes was a single postcard. It had not been there when Sweeney closed the office the previous evening. He was certain of that. The postcard was blank on the address side. On the message side, written in pencil in what handwriting analysts would later confirm was June Fielding's script, were 4 words: "We found the door." The investigation that followed was extensive but fruitless. Deputies searched the post office from floor to ceiling. They examined the walls for hidden passages, the floor for trapdoors, the ceiling for access points. They found nothing. The building was exactly what it appeared to be: a small, solid, unremarkable structure with 1 entrance and no secrets. Tracking dogs were brought in from Evanston. They followed the girls' scent to the post office door and stopped. They circled the building several times but could not pick up a trail leading away. It was as though Mary and June Fielding had walked into the post office and simply ceased to exist. The postcard was analyzed by the State Crime Laboratory in Cheyenne. The paper was standard commercial stock, available at any drugstore. The pencil was ordinary graphite. There were no fingerprints on the card except for those matching June Fielding. The message offered no clues, only questions. What door had the girls found? Where did it lead? And why had June felt compelled to write about it? Vera Fielding became convinced that her daughters had not been taken by any human agency. In a letter to her sister written 3 weeks after the disappearance, she expressed a belief that defied rational explanation. "They didn't run away," she wrote. "They didn't wander off. Something opened for them, something that doesn't open for everyone, and they walked through it because they didn't know they shouldn't." She never elaborated on what she meant. She never spoke publicly about the case. She died in 1981, having never learned what happened to her daughters. Donald Fielding searched for years. He hired private investigators, consulted with psychics, wrote letters to police departments across the western states. None of it produced results. He passed away in 1974, a man hollowed out by a question that had no answer. The post office continued to operate, though Vernon Sweeney reportedly refused to work alone after the incident. He retired in 1968 and moved to Salt Lake City. In a rare interview given to a Utah newspaper in 1973, he offered his only public reflection on that day. "I've thought about it every day since," he said. 30 seconds. That's all I was turned away. 30 seconds, and 2 little girls vanished from a room with 1 door and no windows they could reach. I don't know what happened, but I know it wasn't natural. I know it wasn't right. When asked about the postcard, Sweeney hesitated. "The door," he said quietly. "That's what she wrote. But there's only one door in that building, and I was standing in front of it." The Cokeville post office was renovated in 1985. Workers who removed the original floorboards reported finding nothing unusual beneath them. The building remains in use today, though few current residents know its history. The shoes and the postcard were returned to the Fielding family estate and are believed to have been buried with Vera Fielding at her request. The case was never closed. It remains on file with the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, classified as an open missing persons investigation. No bodies have ever been found. No credible sightings have ever been reported. Mary and June Fielding, if they are still alive, would be 75 years old. But no one who knew them believes they aged. No one who studied the case believes they walked out of the post office through any door that appears on the building's floor plan. Some doors, the old-timers in Cokeville say, don't lead to other rooms. They lead to other places entirely, places that don't give people back. And once in a great while, someone finds one. The Fielding sisters found theirs on a Friday afternoon in September, 2 blocks from home, in a building where nothing extraordinary had ever happened before, and nothing extraordinary has happened since. They left their shoes behind. They left a postcard, and they left a question that no one has ever answered. What door, and where does it go? Time does not move the same way in every place. Spotted Horse is not a town in any conventional sense. It is a name on a map, a dot in the vast emptiness of Campbell County in northeastern Wyoming, where the high plains roll toward Montana, and the nearest real settlement is Gillette, 40 miles to the southwest. The landscape is grass and sky and wind, interrupted occasionally by cottonwoods clustered along seasonal creeks. Cattle outnumber people by a factor that no one has bothered to calculate. Those who live here do so because they were born here, or because they came looking for a kind of solitude that most people cannot endure. In the 1920s and 30s, this land drew homesteaders, families, and individuals who staked claims under the expanded provisions of the Stock-Raising Homestead Act, hoping to build lives on 640 acres of government land. Most failed. The soil was poor, the winters brutal, and the isolation crushing. By 1940, the majority of these homesteads had been abandoned. Their occupants moved on to cities or simply vanished into the anonymous machinery of the Depression. The structures they left behind, sod houses, wooden shacks, root cellars, decayed slowly in the dry climate, monuments to ambitions the land had refused to honor. The Aldridge Homestead, located approximately 11 miles northeast of the Spotted Horse Crossroads, was one such property. It was claimed in 1924 by a man named Emmett Aldridge, a 41-year-old bachelor who had previously worked as a railroad clerk in Omaha. Little is known about why Aldridge chose to homestead or why he selected this particular parcel. County records show that he filed the necessary paperwork, built a small frame house, and attempted to raise sheep. He had no family in the area. He received mail infrequently. He appeared in town once or twice a year to purchase supplies. The last confirmed record of Emmett Aldridge's existence is dated November 8, 1934. A withdrawal of $17 from his account at the First National Bank of Gillette. The transaction was time-stamped at 2:14 in the afternoon, except that the bank's records show the timestamp was 4 minutes ahead of the official time kept by the Western Union clock across the street. A teller noted the discrepancy in the ledger margin, but did not investigate. It was a small thing, easily forgotten. Emmett Aldridge was never seen again. No missing persons report was filed. Aldridge had no family to notice his absence, and his neighbors, such as they were, assumed he had simply left, as so many others had. His homestead sat undisturbed. The county eventually reclaimed the land for unpaid taxes in 1941, but no one came to assess or occupy the property. It remained on the books as vacant agricultural land, visited only by the occasional hunter or lost traveler. For 73 years, the Aldridge homestead existed in a kind of administrative silence, present on maps, absent from memory. That changed in September of 2007. A Gillette-based land surveyor named Robert Frazier was conducting boundary assessments for a proposed wind farm when he encountered the Aldridge property. The original homestead structure was still standing, barely. The roof had partially collapsed, and the windows were empty of glass. But when Frazier approached to photograph the building for his report, he noticed something unusual. Through the open doorway, he could see a clock on the fireplace mantel. Its hands were moving. Frazier entered the structure and found the interior remarkably preserved. Dust covered every surface and cobwebs draped the corners, but the furnishings appeared largely intact. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a narrow bed frame with a rotted mattress. Canned goods lined a shelf above the stove, their labels faded beyond legibility. A pair of work boots sat beside the door as though their owner had just stepped out. The clock was a Seth Thomas mantel clock, a common model from the early 20th century. It was mechanical, powered by a mainspring that required manual winding. Such clocks typically ran for 8 days between windings. This one, according to Frazier's later testimony, was keeping perfect time, except that it was set 4 minutes ahead. Frazier reported his discovery to the Campbell County Sheriff's Office, uncertain whether he had stumbled upon a historical curiosity or something more troubling. Deputies arrived the following day and conducted a preliminary search of the property. They found no human remains, no signs of violence, and no indication of recent habitation. The structure appeared to have been sealed by time itself, undisturbed, untouched, waiting. But the clock presented a problem that no one could explain. A mechanical clock cannot run for 73 years without winding. The mainspring would have exhausted itself within days of Aldridge's disappearance. Yet the clock was running when Frazier found it, and it continued to run during the sheriff's investigation, and it was still running when a historian from the Wyoming State Archives arrived 3 weeks later to document the site. The historian, a woman named Caroline Jessup, examined the clock carefully. She confirmed it was a genuine Seth Thomas model consistent with manufacturing dates between 1910 and 1925. The mechanism showed no signs of modification or modern intervention. The mainspring, when she opened the case, was fully wound, as though someone had turned the key that very morning. "That's not possible," she wrote in her assessment. "There is no power source. There is no caretaker. The house has been abandoned for decades, and yet the clock runs." She also noted the 4-minute discrepancy. When she compared the clock's time to the official time on her cell phone, synchronized to atomic standards, the clock was exactly 4 minutes ahead. Not 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Not 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Exactly 4 minutes. The same discrepancy recorded in the bank ledger in 1934. Investigators attempted to locate any living relatives of Emmett Aldridge. After extensive genealogical research, they identified a grandniece in Colorado named Helen Brandt, the granddaughter of Aldridge's younger sister. Brandt, 78 years old at the time, had never heard of her great-uncle. Her grandmother had rarely spoken of him, and when she did, it was only to say that he had gone away before the war and never come back. Brandt traveled to Wyoming in October of 2007 to view the homestead. She spent less than 10 minutes inside before asking to leave. When a reporter from the Gillette News Record asked her what she had seen, she shook her head. "Nothing," she said. "That's what bothered me. It looks like he just stepped out, like he's coming back any minute. But he's been gone longer than I've been alive." She paused, then added, "That clock was ticking the whole time I was in there. I couldn't stop hearing it. It sounded wrong somehow. Too loud. like it was counting something other than seconds. The homestead was secured by the county and designated a site of historical interest. The clock was removed for preservation and transported to the Jim Gatchell Memorial Museum in Buffalo, Wyoming, where it was placed in a climate-controlled display case. According to museum staff, it stopped running within 48 hours of leaving the Aldridge property. Every attempt to restart it has failed. The mainspring winds correctly. The gears engage, but the hands do not move. Whatever mechanism kept it running for 73 years in that abandoned house appears to have ceased functioning the moment the clock was removed from the premises. Emmett Aldridge was never found. No remains were discovered on the property or in the surrounding area. His bank account, dormant since 1934, was formally closed in 2008. His homestead claim was absorbed into the adjacent wind farm development, and the original structure was demolished in 2011 after being deemed a safety hazard. Before the demolition, a local photographer named Marcus Trujillo documented the interior one final time. His photographs show the empty mantel where the clock once sat, the dust-covered table, the boots by the door. In one image, taken at midday, a shadow falls across the floor in a shape that Trujillo could not account for. A silhouette that might have been a man standing in the doorway, though no one else was present. Trujillo dismissed it as a trick of the light. He did not return to the property. The clock remains at the museum in Buffalo, silent and still, its hands frozen at an unremarkable hour. The 4-minute discrepancy has never been explained. Neither has the mechanism that kept it running, alone, in an empty house, through decades when no hand should have wound it. Some who have studied the case believe Emmett Aldridge never left his homestead at all, that whatever happened to him happened there, in that small room, in the presence of a clock that kept counting even after he stopped. Others prefer not to think about it. Time, after all, is supposed to move forward. It is supposed to be consistent, measurable, indifferent. But in Spotted Horse, Wyoming, in a house that no longer stands, time did something else entirely. And for 73 years, only the clock knew what. The river gives back what it chooses, and only when it chooses. The North Platte River begins in the mountains of northern Colorado and flows nearly 700 miles through Wyoming and Nebraska before joining the South Platte east of the city that bears their combined name. For much of its length, the river is wide and shallow, braided across sandbars and gravel flats that shift with each season's runoff. In wet years, it runs full and brown with sediment. In dry years, it shrinks to a fraction of its channel, exposing rocks and debris that have not seen sunlight in decades. Near the town of Evansville, just east of Casper, the river passes through a stretch of bottomland where the old Oregon Trail once crossed. This was Reshaw's Bridge, or more precisely, the site of a toll bridge operated by a French-Canadian trader named John Baptiste Richard, whose name Anglo settlers corrupted to Reshaw. The bridge stood from 1853 to 1867, one of the few reliable crossings on this section of the Emigrant Road. Thousands of wagons passed over it, paying 25 cents per vehicle and 5 cents per head of livestock. Richard became wealthy. The bridge became famous. And then, like so much of that era, it disappeared. The original structure was destroyed by flooding in 1867 and never rebuilt. The railroad arrived. The emigrants stopped coming. The crossing point faded from memory, marked only by a small historical sign erected by the state in 1947. Today, the site is unremarkable. A bend in the river, a stand of cottonwoods, a boat launch used by local fishermen. But the fishermen know something that the historical markers do not mention. Every 7 to 12 years, when drought conditions lower the North Platte to exceptional levels, the riverbed near the old bridge site reveals objects that should not be there. The first documented discovery occurred in 1931. A fisherman named George Prentice was wading near the eastern bank when he noticed something protruding from the exposed mud. He pulled it free and found a leather shoe, a man's brogan, square-toed, with wooden pegs instead of nails. The style was consistent with footwear from the mid-19th century. Approximately 15 feet away, he found a second shoe of identical make. Both were facing east toward the rising sun, as though their owner had been walking in that direction when he lost them. Prentice brought the shoes to the Natrona County Sheriff, who recorded the find but took no further action. The shoes were assumed to be relics from the emigrant era, dislodged by erosion. They were donated to a local museum, where they remained in storage until being discarded during a collection purge in 1968. In 1943, during another period of low water, a teenage boy named William Stoddard discovered two more shoes in nearly the same location. These were smaller, a woman's size with delicate lacing, and a low heel. They were also facing east, positioned side by side as though placed deliberately. Stoddard's father, a history teacher at Natrona County High School, recognized the style as consistent with 1850s fashion. He photographed the shoes and submitted an article to the Casper Tribune-Herald, which published a brief story under the headline, "River Reveals Pioneer Relics." The article noted that no other belongings were found. No clothing, no bones, no wagon parts, just the shoes, alone in the mud, facing east. The pattern continued. In 1954, a pair of child's boots. In 1966, another woman's shoes. In 1977, a pair of men's work boots with distinctive square toes. In 1988, two pairs were found within 20 feet of each other, one adult male, one adult female. Each discovery occurred during periods of extreme low water. Each pair was oriented the same way. Each matched the style of footwear worn during the Oregon Trail era. Local historians began to take notice. In 1992, a researcher named Dorothy Crandall compiled a comprehensive record of the discoveries, cross-referencing them with emigrant diaries, military reports, and newspaper accounts from the 1850s and 60s. Her findings, published in a regional historical journal, were disturbing. Between 1858 and 1866, at least 14 travelers were reported missing in the vicinity of Reshaw's Bridge. The disappearances were scattered across multiple wagon trains and occurred in different seasons. Some were attributed to drowning during high water. Others were blamed on Native American attacks, though no bodies or evidence of violence was ever recovered. A few were simply noted as lost, travelers who walked away from their camps and never returned. Crandall identified descriptions of the missing travelers' clothing from surviving letters and journals. In 7 cases, the footwear was described in sufficient detail to compare with the recovered shoes. All 7 matched. A pair of men's brogans found in 1931 corresponded to the description of shoes worn by a man named Elias Whitford, a cabinet maker from Ohio, who vanished from his wagon train on the night of September 12, 1859. His wife wrote in her diary that he had complained of strange dreams and walked toward the river after midnight. His shoes, she noted, were new, purchased in St. Joseph before departure, with distinctive square toes. The woman's shoes found in 1943 matched a description provided by the sister of Margaret Holbrook, a young widow traveling alone to California in 1861. Margaret was last seen near the toll bridge on the morning of July 7th. Her sister later wrote that Margaret had been wearing her good shoes, a pair of lace-up boots with low heels purchased in Philadelphia before the journey. The child's boots from 1954 corresponded to no known missing person, but Crandall noted that many child deaths went unrecorded during the immigrant era. The Oregon Trail claimed thousands of young lives to disease, accident, and exposure. Not all of them were documented. Not all of them were mourned in writing. The discoveries continued into the 21st century. In 2002, a retired geologist named Frank Olofsson was conducting an informal survey of the riverbed when he found a pair of men's shoes partially buried in silt. He photographed them in place before removing them and noted their orientation, facing east toward the old trail crossing as though their owner had been walking back the way he came. Olofsson, familiar with Crandall's research, measured the precise location using GPS coordinates. He then compared his readings with the locations of previous discoveries as best as he could reconstruct them from historical accounts. The shoes were all found within a radius of approximately 40 feet, a circle centered on a point that, according to 19th century maps, corresponded to the eastern end of Reshaw's Bridge. Not the middle of the bridge, not the western approach. The eastern end, the point where travelers would have stepped off the bridge and onto solid ground, completing their crossing, continuing their journey west. Except that these travelers, apparently, had been facing east. Olofsson shared his findings with the Wyoming State Historic Preservation Office, which conducted a limited archaeological survey of the site in 2004. The survey found no additional artifacts and offered no explanation for the shoe discoveries. The official report noted only that the site demonstrates evidence of historical use consistent with the emigrant period and recommended no further action. But fishermen who work the North Platte know what the officials do not say. They know that the shoes appear only at low water, as though the river must recede to release them. They know that the shoes are always in pairs, always oriented the same way, always in the same small area. They know that no other belongings are ever found. No buttons, no buckles, no belt hardware, no bones, just the shoes. As though the river kept everything else. An elderly fishing guide named Harold Swenson, who has worked the North Platte since 1964, offered his own theory in an interview conducted in 2015. People think the river just washes things downstream, he said, but this river doesn't work like that. It holds onto things. It keeps them in place, buried in the silt, for years and years. And then, when the water drops low enough, it shows you what it's been hiding. He paused, looking out at the water. Those people walked onto that bridge and something happened to them. They didn't drown, or if they did, the river would have taken their bodies downstream, not kept them in one spot. They didn't walk away, or we'd find shoes scattered all over. They stopped right there at the end of the bridge, and they turned around, like they saw something, like they were going back. When asked what they might have seen, Swenson shook his head. I don't know, but whatever it was, they left their shoes behind, and the river's been giving them back ever since. The last recorded discovery occurred in 2019 during a drought that dropped the North Platte to its lowest level in 30 years. A kayaker found two shoes near the eastern bank, men's brogans, heavily worn, facing east. They were photographed, documented, and eventually donated to the Fort Caspar Museum. The museum's records list them simply as emigrant-era footwear, provenance unknown. But the fishermen know where they came from. They know the spot. They know the orientation. And they know that when the water drops again, as it always does, there will be more. The river keeps its secrets for years at a time, but it never keeps them forever. It just waits for the right moment to remind us that some crossings were never completed, and some travelers never made it to the other side. Underground sound behaves differently than it does in the open air. Atlantic City, Wyoming sits at an elevation of 7,800 feet in the Wind River Range, a remnant of the 1860s gold rush that briefly transformed this remote valley into one of the most populated places in the territory. The boom lasted less than a decade. By 1872, most of the easily accessible placer gold had been exhausted, and the miners moved on to richer strikes elsewhere. The town survived, barely, sustained by occasional prospectors, and the stubborn hope that deeper deposits might still be found. that hope proved partly justified. In the 1960s, advances in extraction technology made it profitable to revisit old claims, and several small operations reopened in the hills around Atlantic City. The mines were modest, family-owned ventures employing a handful of men, working shafts that the original miners had abandoned a century earlier. The gold they produced was measured in ounces, not tons, but it was enough to keep the lights on in a town that had nearly become a ghost. The Carlin Shaft was one such operation. Located approximately 3 miles northeast of Atlantic City, it had been dug in 1867, abandoned in 1873, and reopened in 1968 by a partnership of local investors. The mine was never profitable, but it operated continuously for nearly 2 decades, employing between 4 and 8 men at any given time. Most worked the day shift. A smaller crew handled overnight maintenance and exploratory drilling. On the night of November 15, 1974, 6 men descended into the Carlin Shaft for a routine overnight shift. They were foreman Walter Novak, age 53, driller Raymond Haskell, age 38, powderman Eugene Stott, age 44, muckers David Lindgren and Albert Rowan, ages 29 and 31, and surveyor's assistant Thomas Beckwith, age 24. All 6 were experienced underground workers. All 6 had worked together for at least 2 years. The shift began at 10 in the evening. The men's primary task was to extend a lateral drift on the 400-foot level, chasing a vein that geological surveys suggested might widen further into the rock. The work was slow and methodical, drilling blast holes, setting charges, clearing debris. By 2 in the morning, they had completed 1 round of blasting and were waiting for the dust to settle before advancing. It was during this waiting period that the incident occurred. The men had gathered in a widened section of the drift, approximately 100 feet back from the blast site. They were sitting on overturned buckets and crates, eating sandwiches from their lunch pails, and talking to pass the time. The conversation was unremarkable: weather, hunting season, a football game scheduled for the following weekend. Novak later described it as the kind of talk that fills silence without saying much. At approximately 2:20, Haskell made a comment about a deer he had seen near his property the previous morning. Several men responded. The conversation continued for another few minutes before Novak noticed something strange. There were too many voices. In his incident report, filed with the mine's ownership group 3 days later, Novak described the realization in clinical terms. During routine conversation, I became aware of a voice I could not attribute to any member of the present crew. The voice appeared to be participating in the discussion, responding appropriately to statements made by others. I attempted to identify the speaker, but was unable to do so. Novak called for a head count. He pointed to each man in turn, asking them to identify themselves and confirm their position. The count came to 5. 5 men, not 6. Novak counted again. 5. He asked if anyone had left the group to relieve himself or check equipment. No one had. He asked if anyone had heard someone approach from elsewhere in the mine. No one had. But all 5 men confirmed that they had heard 6 distinct voices in the conversation, their own and 5 others. The mathematics did not work. 6 men had descended into the mine. 5 were present at the head count. 6 voices had been heard. Each man was certain he had spoken during the conversation, and each man was certain he had heard the other 5 speak as well. But when Novak asked each man to account for specific statements made during the discussion, the answers became contradictory. Haskell insisted that Lindgren had made a joke about the football game. Lindgren denied saying it. Stott claimed Beckwith had mentioned a problem with one of the drills. Beckwith said he hadn't spoken at all during that part of the conversation. Rowan remembered Novak telling a story about his father-in-law. Novak had no memory of saying any such thing. The men searched the immediate area, thinking perhaps someone had wandered into the drift from another part of the mine. They found no one. They checked the shaft elevator and confirmed it had not moved since their descent. They examined the ventilation passages and found them too narrow for a man to pass through. There was no seventh person in the mine. There was no sixth voice that could be attributed to any of them. And yet all 6 men, Novak included himself in this count, were certain they had heard exactly 6 voices during the conversation, one of which did not belong to anyone present. The shift continued. The men completed their work and ascended at 6 in the morning, but the unease lingered. Over the following days, Novak interviewed each crew member separately, asking them to reconstruct the conversation as best they could remember. The accounts were inconsistent in specific details, but agreed on one point. At some moment during the discussion, each man had heard a statement that he could not attribute to any of the others, and that he was certain he had not made himself. Haskell described hearing someone say, "It's colder down here than it used to be." He did not recognize the voice. When asked to describe it, he said only that it sounded like one of us, but not. Stott reported hearing a comment about the quality of the rock, something about how this vein doesn't want to be found. He assumed Novak had said it, but Novak denied making any such statement. Beckwith, the youngest of the crew, was the most disturbed by the experience. In his written statement, he described a moment when he heard his own name spoken aloud, as though someone was trying to get his attention. He turned to respond and found no one looking at him. When he asked who had called him, the other men said they hadn't heard anything. The Carlin shaft continued operations without further incident for the remainder of 1974. But the crew dynamics had shifted. Men who had worked together comfortably for years became hesitant to speak underground. Conversations grew shorter, more purposeful. The casual talk that had once filled the waiting periods between blasts simply stopped. Novak resigned as foreman in February of 1975, citing personal reasons. Haskell left the following month. By summer, only Rowan remained from the original night shift crew, and he transferred to day work shortly afterward. The mine's ownership never publicly addressed the incident. The report Novak filed was archived without comment and remained in storage until the mine closed permanently in 1987. A researcher examining the company's records in 2003 discovered the document and attempted to contact the surviving crew members. Of the 6 men present that night, only 2 were still living. Rowan, by then 71 years old and residing in Lander, agreed to a brief interview. His account was consistent with the original report, though he added one detail that had not been documented. After the head count, he said, "I remember looking around at the other guys, trying to figure out who was missing. And for just a second I couldn't remember how many of us there were supposed to be. I knew it was 6. I'd worked with those men for years. But standing there counting faces, I couldn't hold the number in my head. It kept slipping." He paused, then continued, "I've thought about it a lot since then, and I don't think someone joined our conversation that night. I think someone was already there, someone we couldn't see, who'd been there the whole time, just waiting for a chance to speak." When asked who he thought it might have been, Rowan shook his head. "That mine's been dug and abandoned twice. Probably 100 men worked those tunnels over the years. Some of them died down there, cave-ins, accidents, bad air. We used to find old tools sometimes, way back in the drifts. Picks, lanterns, lunch pails, things people left behind." He looked at his hands. "Maybe they left more than tools. Maybe some of them never really came up." The Carlin shaft was sealed in 1988. The entrance collapsed naturally in 2001, and the site is now unmarked, accessible only by overgrown roads that few people travel. Atlantic City remains a town of fewer than 60 residents, surrounded by mountains and the ruins of an industry that promised wealth and delivered only silence. The men who worked the night shift on November 15, 1974, are almost all gone now. The voice they heard has never been explained. The count has never balanced. 6 men went down, 5 were counted. 6 voices spoke, and somewhere in that arithmetic, someone remains unaccounted for, still present, still waiting, still joining conversations that were never meant to include them. Grief follows its own geography, and sometimes it finds you where you least expect. Fort Washakie lies in the heart of the Wind River Indian Reservation, the only reservation in the United States named for the river that runs through it rather than the people who live there. The town serves as the headquarters of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe, a community of approximately 3,000 people spread across 2.2 million acres of mountains, valleys, and high desert. The landscape is vast and largely empty, a place where distances are measured in hours, not miles, and where the silence between places can feel like a presence of its own. The Wind River Range rises to the west, its peaks holding snow well into summer. The rivers that descend from those mountains, the Wind, the Little Wind, the Popo Agi, carve through canyons and meadows before spreading across the reservation's lower elevations. It is beautiful country, but it is also hard country, indifferent to human plans and human sorrow. In the summer of 1991, a land surveyor named Kenneth Driscoll arrived at Fort Washakie to conduct boundary assessments for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The work was routine, establishing property lines, updating records, resolving disputes that had accumulated over decades of administrative neglect. Driscoll, 44 years old and based out of Boise, had been doing this kind of work for nearly 20 years. He was known among his colleagues as meticulous, quiet, and professional. What his colleagues did not know, or knew only vaguely, was that Driscoll had lost his daughter 3 years earlier. Her name was Emma. She was 7 years old when she drowned in the Boise River in June of 1988. The accident occurred during a family picnic. Emma had wandered too close to the water while her parents were distracted, and the current had taken her before anyone could react. Her body was recovered 2 days later, nearly a mile downstream. The funeral was held on a Tuesday. Kenneth Driscoll returned to work the following Monday. He rarely spoke of Emma afterward. His marriage dissolved within a year of her death. He requested field assignments that kept him away from Boise, away from the river, away from the bedroom that still held her drawings and her books, and the small shoes she would never wear again. Work became his method of survival, long days in remote locations, exhaustion that left no room for memory. The assignment at Fort Washakie was supposed to be straightforward. 3 weeks of fieldwork, mostly along the reservation's western boundary, where it met the Shoshone National Forest. Driscoll set up a base camp approximately 12 miles from town, in a meadow near the confluence of 2 unnamed creeks. He worked alone, as he preferred. On the evening of August 7th, after a full day of transit readings and stake placement, Driscoll returned to his camp and found it disturbed. His tent had been taken down, not collapsed, taken down, with the poles removed and the fabric folded neatly beside the ground sheet. His equipment was stacked in an orderly pile: cook stove, water filter, field notebooks, all arranged as though someone was preparing for departure. His cot, which he had left inside the tent that morning, now sat in the open air, its surface covered by a single sheet of paper. Driscoll's first thought was that another surveyor had arrived, perhaps sent by the regional office to assist with the project. But there was no vehicle, no additional equipment, no sign that anyone else was present. The meadow was empty. The only sounds were the wind and the distant rush of water. He approached the cot and looked at the paper. It was a child's drawing, rendered in crayon on standard white paper. The image depicted a girl standing beside a river, her figure simple but recognizable: a triangle dress, stick arms, a circle head with 2 dots for eyes. The river was a band of blue running along the bottom of the page. The girl's feet were in the water. Above the drawing, written in pencil in a child's unsteady hand, were 4 words: "She came back wrong." Driscoll did not move for several minutes. He stood in the fading light, holding the paper, reading the words again and again as though repetition might change their meaning. He recognized the handwriting. He had seen it on birthday cards, on school assignments, on the drawings that still hung in frames in a house he no longer lived in. It was Emma's handwriting. He searched the camp for any other sign of intrusion. He found nothing, no footprints in the soft earth, no disturbance to the surrounding vegetation, no indication that anyone had approached from any direction. The nearest road was 4 miles away. The nearest dwelling was farther still. Whoever had folded his tent and left the drawing had come from nowhere and returned to nowhere. Driscoll did not sleep that night. He sat beside his cot, watching the darkness, listening for sounds that never came. By morning, he had convinced himself that the incident was explicable. A prank by local teenagers, perhaps, or a hiker who had stumbled upon his camp and left a strange calling card. The handwriting was coincidental. Children's handwriting often looks similar. The drawing was meaningless. But he could not bring himself to throw the paper away. He continued his survey work for 3 more days, returning each evening to a camp that remained undisturbed. On the 4th day, he drove into Fort Washakie to resupply and made an unusual request. He asked a clerk at the general store if there had been any reports of missing children in the area. The clerk, a middle-aged Shoshone woman named Loretta Whitehawk, regarded him carefully before answering. "Missing how?" she asked. Driscoll hesitated. "Just missing. Recently. Or maybe a long time ago." Whitehawk studied him for a moment, then shook her head. "Not that I know of, but there are stories." When Driscoll asked what kind of stories, Whitehawk glanced toward the window, toward the mountains visible in the distance. "The old people say the rivers here carry more than water," she said. "They say sometimes the dead come back to the places where they were loved. Not because they want to, because they can't help it. The current brings them." She paused. "But they come back different, changed. The water takes something from them or gives them something they shouldn't have. That's why we're careful about grieving too long. If you hold on too tight, you might pull them back. And what comes back isn't always what you lost." Driscoll thanked her and returned to his camp. He did not mention the drawing. 2 days later, on August 12th, he completed his survey work and prepared to break camp. As he was packing his vehicle, he noticed something he had missed during his previous searches, a small arrangement of stones near the base of a cottonwood tree, approximately 30 feet from where his tent had stood. The stones were arranged in a circle with a single larger stone in the center. The pattern was deliberate, precise, not the random scatter of natural erosion. When Driscoll knelt to examine it, he saw that the central stone was flat and smooth, and that something had been scratched into its surface. A name, 4 letters, crudely carved but legible. EMMA. Driscoll left Fort Washakie that afternoon. He filed his survey report with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and requested reassignment to a different region. His supervisor noted that Driscoll seemed distracted during their debriefing, but attributed it to fatigue. The drawing remained in Driscoll's possession. He kept it in a folder with other documents related to his work, neither displayed nor discarded. He never showed it to anyone. He never spoke of what had happened at the camp. In 1994, 3 years after the incident, Driscoll retired from surveying and moved to a small town in eastern Oregon. He lived alone in a house near the John Day River, though neighbors noted that he never walked along the water and seemed to avoid looking at it directly. A former colleague who visited him in 2001 reported that Driscoll's living room contained a single framed photograph, a school portrait of a young girl with brown hair and a shy smile. The colleague asked about the photo, and Driscoll said only, "That's my daughter. She died." He did not elaborate. He did not mention the drawing or the tent or the stones arranged beneath a cottonwood tree in a meadow near Fort Washakie. Kenneth Driscoll passed away in 2009. His belongings were handled by a cousin in California who found the folder containing the drawing while sorting through boxes of old paperwork. The cousin did not recognize the handwriting and assumed it was a memento from Driscoll's childhood. The drawing was discarded along with most of the other documents, but the words remained true, even if no one was left to read them. She came back wrong. Whatever had found Kenneth Driscoll in that meadow, whatever had folded his tent and left a message in his dead daughter's hand, it was not Emma, or not the Emma he remembered. It was something wearing her shape, carrying her name, reaching across 3 years and 400 miles to deliver a warning that no father should ever have to receive. The rivers of the Wind River Reservation still run cold and clear, fed by snowmelt from peaks that have never been mapped in full. The Shoshone still tell their stories about what the water carries and what it brings back. And somewhere, perhaps, in a current that flows beneath all the rivers of the world, a girl who drowned in Idaho is still trying to find her way home, changed by the journey, wrong in ways that cannot be named, but searching nonetheless. Some currents never stop, some grief never ends, and some things that come back should never have been called. Some calls come from places the phone lines don't reach. Wamsutter, Wyoming, exists at the intersection of nothing and nowhere. The town sits along Interstate 80 in the Red Desert, a high plateau of sagebrush and alkali flats where the wind never stops and the horizon offers no relief. The population hovers around 500, most of them employed by the natural gas industry or the Union Pacific Railroad. There is a gas station, a convenience store, a few scattered trailers and prefabricated homes. The nearest city of any size is Rock Springs, 45 miles to the west. The nearest anything else is farther still. People pass through Wamsutter. They do not stay. The town falls under the jurisdiction of the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office, though calls from the area are infrequent. Crime is rare. Emergencies are rarer. The desert enforces its own kind of order. If something goes wrong out here, there is often no one around to notice and no one to call for help, which is why the calls from the disconnected number attracted attention. The first documented call arrived on September 14, 2001. A dispatcher at the Sweetwater County Emergency Center received an incoming call at 11:47 in the evening. The caller ID displayed a number with a Wamsutter prefix, 324, followed by 4 digits that the phone company would later confirm had been out of service since 1993. The caller was a woman. Her voice was described in the dispatch log as calm, flat, possibly distressed. She requested a welfare check at an address on Antelope Road in Wamsutter, a street that, according to county records, does not exist. When the dispatcher asked the woman to clarify the address, she repeated it exactly. 217 Antelope Road, Wamsutter. When asked for her name, she said, "I need you to check on me." When asked to explain, the line went dead. Deputies were dispatched to Wamsutter, but found no Antelope Road and no structure matching the description. A search of county plat maps, both current and historical, revealed no record of any road by that name ever existing within town limits. The call was logged as a possible prank and filed without further investigation. 1 year later, on September 14, 2002, the same number called again. The dispatcher on duty that night was different, but the conversation was nearly identical. A woman's voice, calm and flat, requesting a welfare check on herself at 217 Antelope Road. The same address, the same phrasing, the same abrupt disconnection when asked for clarification. This time the dispatcher noted the date in her report, September 14th. She did not know its significance, neither did anyone else at the department. The calls continued. Every year, on September 14th, between 11:30 and midnight, the disconnected number would appear on the emergency line. The woman's voice never changed. The request never varied. The address remained impossible. By 2007, the pattern had become A source of quiet unease within the department, dispatchers began warning each other as the date approached. Some refused to work the late shift on September 14th. Others treated it as a grim curiosity, a ghost story made real, a glitch in the system that no one could explain. A technician from the phone company was brought in to examine the line records. He confirmed that the number had been assigned to a residential address in Wamsutter from 1985 to 1993, when the account was closed. The subscriber's name was Elaine Vickers. The address was not on Antelope Road. It was on Sagebrush Lane, a street that still exists on the town's eastern edge. Deputies visited the address. The structure that had once stood there, a single wide trailer, had been removed in 1994. The lot was empty, overgrown with weeds, indistinguishable from the surrounding desert. No one named Elaine Vickers appeared in current state records. A search of historical databases revealed a driver's license issued in 1983 and renewed in 1987. The photograph showed a woman in her early 30s with light brown hair and an expression that the deputy who reviewed the file described as tired. No further records existed, no death certificate, no forwarding address, no indication of what had happened to her after 1988. 1988. A retired dispatcher named Harold Engebretson, who had worked for Sweetwater County from 1975 to 2003, was contacted by investigators in 2009. When asked about the calls, he nodded slowly. "I remember Elaine Vickers," he said. "Or at least, I remember the name. Someone called about her back in '88, September, I think. A welfare check request, just like the ones you're describing." When asked who had made the original call, Engebretson shook his head. "That's the thing," he said. "I don't remember. I don't remember if we sent anyone out. I don't remember what happened. It's like there's a hole where the memory should be." He paused, then added, "But I remember the name, Elaine Vickers. And I remember thinking even then that something was wrong. Something about the way the call came in, the voice on the line." No official record of a welfare check request for Elaine Vickers in 1988 exists in Sweetwater County files. No incident report, no dispatch log, no case number. The department's records from that year are incomplete. A filing cabinet was damaged in a basement flood in 1992, and many documents from the late 80s were lost. But even the surviving indexes show no entry for the name. If a call was made, it was never logged. If deputies were sent, they left no report. If something happened to Elaine Vickers on or around September 14th, 1988, the county has no record of ever knowing about it. And yet the calls continued. In 2012, a dispatcher named Maria Sandoval decided to try something different. When the call came in on September 14th, 11:41 that year, she did not ask for clarification. She did not ask for a name. She simply said, "We're sending someone, Elaine. We're coming to check on you." There was a pause on the line. Then the woman's voice spoke again, for the first and only time deviating from the script. "You never came," she said. "You never came before." The line went dead. Sandoval filed a detailed report of the conversation, including her own emotional response. She described feeling a profound sadness during the call, a sense that she was speaking to someone who had been waiting a very long time for help that never arrived. She transferred to a different department the following year. She did not work another September 14th shift. The call stopped in 2016. That year, September 14th fell on a Wednesday. Dispatchers waited through the night, but no call came. The same was true in 2017 and every year since. The disconnected number has not appeared on the emergency line again. No one knows why the call stopped. No one knows why they started. Elaine Vickers has never been located, and the department has declined to open a formal investigation into her disappearance, if, indeed, she disappeared at all. The lot on Sagebrush Lane where her trailer once stood remains empty. County tax records show it as unimproved land, owned by a holding company in Colorado that purchased it in 2005. No one has attempted to build there, no one has asked questions about its history. But the date remains. September 14th, the anniversary of something that may or may not have happened in 1988. The day when, for 15 years, a dead phone line came alive, and a woman's voice asked someone to check on her at an address that doesn't exist. 23 calls, 23 requests, 23 years too late. The dispatcher's log from 2012 still contains Sandoval's final notation, written in the margin beside the call record. She was asking for help. She's still asking. But I don't think anyone can reach her now. The desert outside Wamsutter stretches in every direction, flat and featureless, hiding nothing and revealing nothing. The wind moves through the sage without stopping. The phone lines hum with static. And somewhere, perhaps, a woman waits by a phone that was disconnected decades ago, hoping that this time, finally, someone will answer. Someone will come. Someone will check on her. But the address doesn't exist. The road was never built, and the call, when it comes, arrives from a place that no one can find on any map. Some welfare checks cannot be completed. Some people cannot be saved. And some calls keep coming year after year because the person on the other end has nowhere else to turn, and no one left to call but the ones who never came. Light does not behave the same way in every room. Thermopolis, Wyoming calls itself the home of the world's largest mineral hot spring, a claim that draws tourists to this small town in the Bighorn Basin, despite its remoteness. The springs have been used for centuries, first by the Shoshone and Arapaho, later by settlers who built bathhouses and hotels to capitalize on the water's supposed healing properties. The town that grew up around them has the feel of a place caught between eras, its historic downtown lined with buildings from the early 1900s, its economy dependent on visitors seeking relief from ailments that modern medicine cannot cure. The Riverside Motor Lodge sits 3 blocks from the main hot springs complex, a 2-story motel built in 1954 and renovated only twice since. It is not a destination in itself, merely a place to sleep for travelers passing through on Highway 20, or for those who cannot afford the newer accommodations closer to the springs. The rooms are small, the furnishings dated, the walls thin enough to hear conversations in adjacent units. Most guests stay one night. Few stay longer. Room 14 on the second floor at the western end of the building has a history that the management does not advertise. In July of 1968, a traveling salesman named Bernard Kohler checked into room 14 for what he told the front desk would be a 3-night stay. Kohler, 47 years old, sold industrial cleaning supplies to businesses across Wyoming and Montana. He had stayed at the Riverside before, at least twice in the previous year, according to registration cards that survived a 1982 fire in the motel's office. He was described by staff as polite, quiet, and unremarkable. Kohler was last seen entering room 14 on the evening of July 19th, 1968. When he failed to check out on July 22nd, a maid entered the room and found it empty. His suitcase was open on the bed, his clothes neatly folded inside. His car remained in the parking lot. His toiletries were arranged on the bathroom counter. The television was on, tuned to a channel that had gone to static. Bernard Kohler was never seen again. The Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office investigated the disappearance for 3 months before classifying the case as inactive. No body was found. No witnesses came forward. No evidence of foul play was discovered. Kohler's wife, contacted in Billings, said he had called her on the evening of July 19th and mentioned nothing unusual. The case file grew thin with the absence of leads and was eventually archived. Room 14 continued to be rented. The motel changed ownership twice. The story of the vanishing salesman became a local curiosity, told occasionally by longtime employees to guests who seemed interested in such things. Most were not. Most simply wanted a bed for the night and a shower in the morning. Then, in August of 2008, a man who gave his name as James Holbrook checked into room 14. The desk clerk who processed the registration, a 23-year-old named Cassandra Trent, later provided a detailed statement to investigators. She described Holbrook as approximately 50 years old, of average height and build, with graying hair and a weathered face. He paid in cash for 2 nights, though he mentioned he might extend his stay. He carried a single duffel bag. He asked no questions about the room, the town, or the hot springs. He seemed tired, Trent said. Not sleepy tired, more like worn out. Like he'd been traveling a long time and wasn't sure where he was going. She gave him the key to room 14. He climbed the exterior stairs and entered the room at approximately 6:15 in the evening. The security camera mounted at the corner of the building recorded his arrival. Over the next 47 hours, the camera recorded no activity at the door of room 14, no exits, no entries. The housekeeping staff, per motel policy, did not service occupied rooms unless requested. No request was made. On the morning of August 14th, Holbrook's 2-night reservation expired. When he did not check out by 11, Trent called the room phone. There was no answer. She waited until noon, then sent a housekeeper to knock on the door. Again, no answer. At 12:30, Trent used the master key to enter room 14. The room was empty. The bed was made, not slept in, according to the housekeeper, but made with the precision of someone who had never intended to sleep at all. The duffel bag sat on the luggage rack, unopened. A glass of water stood on the nightstand, 3/4 full. The television was off. The bathroom contained no personal items. James Holbrook had vanished. The subsequent investigation recovered the security footage from the 47-hour period and reviewed it frame by frame. The footage confirmed that Holbrook had entered the room and never left through the door. There was no rear exit. Room 14 had only one entrance. The window faced the parking lot and was visible in the camera's peripheral range, though not directly. It was during the review of this peripheral footage that investigators noticed the anomaly. Room 14's window measured approximately 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall. The curtains, standard beige drapes provided by the motel, were open when Holbrook entered the room. They remained open for the duration of his stay. At no point in the 47 hours of footage did anyone close them. The room faced west. Each afternoon, sunlight streamed through the window at a low angle, casting visible shadows of the curtain rod and frame onto the parking lot below. On the afternoon of August 12th, the day Holbrook checked in, the shadow of the window appeared on the pavement as expected. On the afternoon of August 13th, it appeared again. But at no point during either afternoon or any other time during his stay did a human silhouette appear in the window. No shadow of a man standing, no shadow of a man sitting, no movement, no presence, no indication that anyone occupied the room at all. The footage showed the window clearly enough to detect the shadow of a curtain swaying slightly in the air conditioning draft, but of James Holbrook there was nothing. Investigators measured the angles. They recreated the conditions. They confirmed that anyone standing within 6 feet of the window during daylight hours would have cast a visible shadow on the parking lot surface. They confirmed that the camera's resolution was sufficient to detect such a shadow. They could not explain its absence. The motel's owner, a man named Franklin Ostrowski, who had purchased the property in 1994, was reluctant to discuss the incident publicly. In a statement to the Hot Springs County Sheriff, he acknowledged that Room 14 had a reputation, but declined to elaborate. When asked if he was aware of the 1968 disappearance, he said only, I've heard the stories. I don't put stock in them. But he did not rent room 14 again. He told staff to mark it as permanently unavailable for maintenance reasons. The room remained empty for the next 3 years until Ostrowski sold the motel in 2011. The new owners, a couple from Colorado named David and Irene Weston, were not told about the room's history. They renovated the building in 2012, converting rooms 12 through 16 into a single extended stay suite. The original room 14 no longer exists as a discrete unit, but the footage remains. A copy of the security recording was retained by the sheriff's office as part of the Holbrook case file. A deputy who reviewed it in 2015 as part of a cold case reassessment noted his impressions in an internal memo. Subject enters room at 18:15 on 12 August, he wrote. Subject does not exit. Window remains visible and unobstructed for duration of recording. No shadow consistent with human occupancy is observed at any point. Conclusion: either subject exited by unknown means immediately after entry, or subject was present in room but produced no shadow. Neither conclusion is supported by physical evidence or known precedent. The memo was filed without further action. The case remains open. James Holbrook, if that was his real name, has never been identified. No matching missing persons report was filed anywhere in the country. No vehicle registered to that name was found in the area. No family member or acquaintance has come forward to claim knowledge of him. Bernard Kohler's case, 40 years earlier, remains equally unsolved. His family stopped inquiring in the 1970s. His wife died in 1989. His son, contacted by a researcher in 2010, said he had no memory of his father and no interest in revisiting the past. 2 men, 2 disappearances. 40 years apart. The same room. No bodies, no witnesses, no explanations. And one detail that no one has been able to reconcile. A man who spent 47 hours in a room with an open window, in full view of a camera, and cast no shadow at all. Light does not behave the same way in every room. Some rooms take things from the people who enter them. Some rooms give nothing back. Room 14 no longer exists. The window has been replaced. The walls have been moved. But the footage remains in the archive, time-stamped and cataloged, showing an empty window in the afternoon sun and a man who, for reasons no one can explain, left no mark upon the light. He entered the room. He did not leave, and whatever remained of him, in that space between the door and the glass, was not enough to cast a shadow. There are places that exist on maps, but not in conversation. Crowheart Butte rises from the floor of the Wind River Valley like a fist of red rock, its flat summit visible for miles in every direction. The butte takes its name from a battle fought in 1866 between the Shoshone and the Bannock tribes, a conflict that ended, according to oral tradition, when Chief Washakie killed the Bannock leader and ate his heart atop the butte to claim victory. The story is disputed by some historians, but the name has endured. Crowheart is a place defined by what happened there, a landmark whose meaning is inseparable from its history. But there is another place nearby, less than 3 miles to the northeast. That has no such story, or rather, it has a story that no one will tell. The Wind River Reservation surrounds Crowheart Butte, home to the eastern Shoshone and northern Arapaho tribes. The reservation covers more than 2 million acres of mountains, rivers, and high desert, a landscape shaped by forces older than human memory. The people who live here have occupied this land for generations, and their knowledge of its geography runs deeper than any survey or satellite image. They know which valleys flood in spring, which ridges hold snow until July, which meadows attract elk, and which attract something else. They also know which places should not be visited, and which places should not be named. In 1977, an anthropologist from the University of Colorado named Dr. Richard Lanford arrived at the reservation to conduct research on Shoshone oral traditions. Lanford had spent the previous decade documenting indigenous narratives across the American West, and his work was respected by both academic institutions and tribal communities. He was granted permission to interview elders about historical sites in the Wind River region, with the understanding that certain knowledge would remain private. The interviews proceeded without incident for several weeks. Lanford recorded stories about Crowheart Butte, about the hot springs at Thermopolis, about the peaks of the Wind River Range, and the rivers that descended from them. The elders were generous with their time and their memories. Then Lanford asked about a location he had noticed on a 1909 Bureau of Indian Affairs survey map, a small valley northeast of Crowheart Butte, marked with a symbol he did not recognize, and a notation that read, "Only area avoided." The elder he was interviewing, a 73-year-old woman named Agnes Yellowbird, stopped speaking. She looked at Lanford for a long moment, then looked away. "We don't talk about that place," she said. Lanford asked why. Yellowbird did not answer. He asked what the place was called. She shook her head. "It has a name," she said. "But I won't say it. My grandmother told me not to say it. Her grandmother told her the same thing. If you say the name, you call attention to it, and that place has enough attention already." Lanford pressed, gently, for more information. Yellowbird remained silent for several minutes. Then she offered a single statement, which Lanford recorded in his field notes, and later included in an unpublished appendix to his research. "People stop there," she said, "but they don't leave. And what leaves isn't people." She would not elaborate. She ended the interview shortly afterward and declined to speak with Lanford again. Over the following weeks, Lanford attempted to learn more about the unnamed location. He consulted with other elders, with tribal historians, with staff at the reservation's cultural center. The responses were consistent: silence, deflection, or polite refusal. One elder, a man in his 80s named Thomas Whitehorse, acknowledged that the place existed, but said only that some ground is bad and that the old people knew to stay away. When Lanford asked if anyone had ever gone there, Whitehorse nodded slowly. "People have gone," he said. "Some came back, most didn't. The ones who came back were different. They didn't talk right. They didn't look at you the same way, like something was wearing them." He paused, then added, "My uncle went there in 1931. He was gone for 2 days. When he came back, he didn't recognize his own children. He lived another 40 years, but he never spoke about what happened, and he never went near that valley again." Lanford attempted to locate official records of disappearances in the area. He contacted the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Wyoming State Archives. None had any record of missing persons reports associated with the location, which, without a name, was difficult to reference precisely. But through interviews with elderly residents and examination of personal documents, family letters, church records, ranchers' journals, Lanford was able to identify 7 individuals who had reportedly vanished in or near the unnamed valley between 1901 and 1956. The first was a Shoshone hunter named Peter Running Horse, who failed to return from a solo expedition in the autumn of 1901. His family searched for 3 days, but would not enter the valley itself. His body was never found. The second and third were a pair of BIA surveyors, James Colton and Frederick Marsh, who were mapping the reservation's northeastern boundary in 1909. Their equipment was found at the edge of the valley. They were not. The fourth was a rancher's son named William Gruber, 17 years old, who disappeared in 1922 while searching for stray cattle. His horse returned alone. The fifth was a civilian Conservation Corps worker named Daniel Spotted Elk, who wandered away from a road crew in 1936 and was never seen again. The sixth was a school teacher from Lander named Eleanor Vance, who was hiking in the area in 1948 as part of a naturalist expedition. Her companions reported that she had walked ahead on the trail and simply failed to appear at the next overlook. A search found no trace of her. The seventh was a uranium prospector named Howard Gilchrist, who was working the region in 1956 during the atomic energy boom. His Jeep was found parked near the valley's southern approach. His detection equipment was still running. He was gone. 7 people. 55 years. No bodies recovered. No official investigations documented. No state records acknowledging that any of them had ever gone missing. Lanford found this absence of documentation troubling. He contacted the families of the non-native victims, Colton, Marsh, Gruber, Vance, and Gilchrist, and discovered that in each case, the disappearance had been reported to authorities but never followed up. Letters requesting updates had gone unanswered. Case numbers, if they had ever been assigned, could not be located. It was as though the official record had simply declined to acknowledge that these people had ever existed. In 1979, Lanford submitted a request to the Bureau of Indian Affairs for any internal documents related to the unnamed valley. 6 months later, he received a response, a single page stating that no records matching his description were found in the Bureau's archives. But attached to the response, apparently by mistake, was a fragment of an internal memo dated 1941. The visible portion read, "Recommend continued exclusion from survey activities. Local reports consistent with previous assessments. Area should remain unmapped pending further review." There was no signature, no indication of who had written the memo or what previous assessments it referenced. Lanford wrote back requesting clarification. He received no reply. Dr. Richard Lanford retired from academic work in 1988. His research on Shoshone oral traditions was published in several journals, but the material related to the unnamed valley was never included. In a letter to a colleague written in 1992, he explained his reasoning. "I spent 2 years trying to understand that place," he wrote, "and the more I learned, the more I came to believe that the Shoshone were right to keep silent. Some knowledge is not meant to be shared. Some places are not meant to be found. I am not a superstitious man, but I have come to respect the wisdom of people who have lived with certain realities far longer than I have." He concluded, "The valley has no name because naming it would make it real in a way that it should not be. The elders understand this. I did not at first. I do now." Lanford passed away in 2004. His field notes, including the original recording of Agnes Yellowbird's statement, were donated to the University of Colorado's archives, where they remain restricted at the request of the Wind River Tribal Council. The valley northeast of Crowheart Butte still appears on some maps, a small depression between 2 ridgelines, unmarked and unremarked. Satellite imagery shows sparse vegetation, a seasonal creek, nothing unusual. The roads that approach it stop before reaching its edge, as though the engineers who built them knew better than to continue. No official trail leads there. No signs mark its boundaries. No name identifies it in any database or gazetteer, and the people who have lived in its shadow for generations still do not speak of it, not because they have forgotten, but because they remember too well. Some places are not meant to be visited, some places are not meant to be named, and some places, according to those who know them best, take what enters and return something else entirely, something that walks like a person and speaks like a person, but is not in any way that matters a person at all. The Shoshone have a word for such things, but they will not say it, and perhaps that is the wisest choice of all. Some people appear only when they are needed and vanish before they can be thanked. Frontier, Wyoming no longer exists in any meaningful sense. The town once sat near the Utah border in the southwestern corner of the state, a coal mining settlement that rose and fell with the fortunes of the Union Pacific Railroad. At its peak in the 1920s, Frontier had a population of nearly 1,000, Miners, rail workers, shopkeepers, and their families, all dependent on the black seams that ran beneath the hills. By the 1950s, the coal was exhausted and the people had moved on. Today, only foundations remain, scattered among the sagebrush, like the bones of something that died slowly. But in 1943, Frontier was still alive, and the railroad was still running. On the morning of February 17, 1943, Union Pacific passenger train number 47 departed from Ogden, Utah, bound for Cheyenne with 112 passengers aboard. The train consisted of a locomotive, a tender, a baggage car, and 4 passenger coaches. It was running approximately 20 minutes behind schedule due to weather delays. A winter storm had deposited 6 inches of snow across the region overnight, and the tracks required additional inspection before clearance. At approximately 9:47 in the morning, as the train approached the Frontier Junction, the locomotive struck a section of track that had shifted during the night. The cause was later determined to be a combination of frost heave and inadequate maintenance. The ties had rotted beneath the snow, and the weight of the locomotive pushed the rails apart. The engine derailed first, pulling the tender and baggage car with it. The first passenger coach jackknifed and rolled onto its side. The second coach remained upright but was severely damaged. The third and fourth coaches stayed on the tracks but were thrown forward by the sudden stop. 14 people died in the wreck. 37 were injured, some critically. The rescue effort, hampered by snow and the remote location, took nearly 8 hours to complete. Bodies were laid in the Frontier Company store. Survivors were transported to hospitals in Evanston and Rock Springs. The subsequent investigation by the Interstate Commerce Commission focused primarily on mechanical and procedural failures. Witness testimony was collected from crew members, passengers, and rescue workers. Most of these statements were routine, descriptions of the impact, the chaos that followed, the desperate efforts to free trapped victims from the wreckage. But 2 statements, taken independently on separate days, contained a detail that did not match any other record from that morning. The first statement was provided by Edgar Lindstrom, a 44-year-old accountant from Salt Lake City who had been seated in the first passenger coach, the one that rolled. Lindstrom suffered a broken collarbone and severe lacerations, but survived. He was interviewed at the Evanston Hospital on February 19th, 2 days after the accident. According to the interview transcript, Lindstrom described regaining consciousness inside the overturned coach, pinned beneath a section of wooden seating. He could hear other passengers crying for help. He could smell smoke, though no fire was visible. He believed he was going to die. Then, he said, a woman appeared. She was wearing a blue coat, he told the investigator, dark blue like navy. She had her hair pinned up. She didn't say much, just told me to stay calm, that help was coming. She pulled the seat off me. I don't know how. It took 2 men to move it later, but she did it herself. Then she helped me crawl out through a window. When Lindstrom reached the snow outside, he turned to thank the woman. She was gone. He assumed she had returned to help others and did not think about it further until the interview, when he realized he had never seen her again, not among the survivors, not among the rescuers, not among the dead. I asked the nurses if they knew who she was, he said. No one had any idea what I was talking about. The second statement was provided by Ruth Kavanaugh, a 31-year-old nurse traveling from Ogden to Cheyenne to visit her sister. Kavanaugh had been seated in the second coach, which remained upright but suffered structural damage. She was largely uninjured but was trapped for nearly an hour before being extracted by rescue workers. Kavanaugh was interviewed in Rock Springs on February 21st. Her account of the crash itself was consistent with other testimony. But when asked about the rescue effort, she described an encounter that the investigator found unusual enough to note in the margin of the transcript. There was a woman who helped us before the rescue team arrived, Kavanaugh said. She came through the coach, checking on passengers, telling us to stay still, that the structure was unstable. She had a calm voice, very steady. She was wearing a blue coat. Kavanaugh said the woman helped free a young boy whose leg was trapped beneath a fallen luggage rack. She described the woman lifting the rack with apparent ease, then carrying the boy toward the rear of the coach where the damage was less severe. I tried to follow her, Kavanaugh said, but when I got to the back of the car, she wasn't there. The boy was there. He was fine, just frightened. But the woman was gone. I asked him where she went, and he said he didn't know. He said she told him to wait, and then she just walked away. The investigator asked Kavanaugh if she had seen the woman again. She had not. I looked for her, Kavanaugh said. After they got us out, I walked around asking people if they'd seen a woman in a blue coat. No one had. I thought maybe she'd been hurt and taken to a hospital, but I checked the lists. She wasn't on any of them. The investigator noted, witness describes female figure assisting with rescue prior to arrival of official rescue party. Description matches account provided by E. Lindstrom, see statement February 19th. No corresponding individual located in passenger manifest, crew roster, or rescue personnel records. The ICC investigation concluded in April of 1943. The final report attributed the derailment to track failure and made recommendations for improved winter maintenance protocols. The report did not mention the woman in the blue coat. The witness statements describing her were included in the appendix, but received no analysis or follow-up. Union Pacific's internal records from the period were reviewed by a railroad historian in 1987. He found the Lindstrom and Kavanaugh statements and attempted to identify the mysterious woman. He examined the passenger manifest, which listed all 112 ticketed passengers. None matched the description. He reviewed the crew roster. None of the female employees on the train had been wearing blue. He checked the list of rescue workers dispatched from Frontier, Evanston, and Kemmerer. All were male. He also examined the 19 photographs known to have been taken at the crash site, either by investigators, journalists, or bystanders. The images showed the wreckage, the survivors, the rescue efforts. In none of them did a woman in a dark blue coat appear. The historian, whose name was Samuel Beckworth, published a brief article about the discrepancy in a regional railroad journal in 1989. He offered no explanation, only questions. Two witnesses, interviewed separately, provided nearly identical descriptions of a woman who does not appear in any official record, he wrote. Both described her as calm, capable, and helpful. Both described her disappearing without explanation. The simplest interpretation is that both witnesses were mistaken, perhaps confusing the woman with a rescue worker or fellow passenger. But the consistency of the accounts and the absence of any corroborating evidence raises the possibility of something more unusual. He concluded, railroad disasters in this era were often chaotic, and documentation was imperfect. It is possible that a bystander or local resident assisted with the rescue and left before being identified. It is also possible that Lindstrom and Kavanaugh experienced something that cannot be easily explained. Beckworth attempted to contact the two witnesses, but found that both had died, Lindstrom in 1967, Kavanaugh in 1974. Their families had no additional information about the woman in the blue coat. The crash site at Frontier Junction is now unmarked. The tracks were removed in 1962 when the line was decommissioned. The town itself is accessible only by unpaved roads that become impassable in winter. Few people visit. Fewer still know what happened there. But the testimony remains, preserved in the National Archives as part of the ICC's accident investigation records. Two statements, two witnesses, one woman who appeared when she was needed and vanished when her work was done. Edgar Lindstrom, pinned beneath a seat in an overturned railcar, heard her say that help was coming. Ruth Kavanaugh watched her carry a boy to safety with strength that seemed impossible. Both looked for her afterward. Neither found her. The passenger manifest lists 112 names. The rescue records account for every survivor and every casualty. The photographs show everyone who was present. Everyone except the woman in the blue coat who walked through the wreckage helping the trapped and the frightened, and who left no trace except in the memories of two people who never forgot her face. Some witnesses cannot be found because they were never really there, and some help comes from places that no manifest can record, and no camera can capture, and no investigation can explain. The third witness at Frontier Junction remains unidentified. Perhaps she always will. Some confessions arrive too late to explain anything at all. Flaming Gorge Reservoir straddles the Wyoming-Utah border, a 91-mile impoundment created by the damming of the Green River in 1964. The lake fills a series of deep canyons carved over millennia through red and orange sandstone, its waters cold and dark even in summer. Recreational boaters and fishermen know its main channels, but much of the reservoir remains inaccessible. Narrow inlets, submerged cliffs, and coves that see no human visitors from one year to the next. The lake holds secrets simply because there is no one to find them. Sweetwater County encompasses the Wyoming portion of Flaming Gorge, along with thousands of square miles of high desert and scattered communities. The sheriff's office, based in Green River, handles everything from traffic accidents to missing hikers to the occasional drug interdiction along Interstate 80. Serious crimes are rare. Unsolved mysteries are rarer still. Until the letter arrived. On March 14, 2019, a standard white envelope was delivered to the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office through regular mail. It bore no return address. The postmark was partially legible. The date stamp read March 11, 2019, but the location stamp was smudged, showing only partial letters that the Postal Service could not definitively identify. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of white paper, folded twice. On it, written in black ballpoint pen in neat, unremarkable handwriting, were two lines, 41.17284, negative 109.54891. I'm sorry I couldn't bring her back. The desk sergeant who opened the letter, a 20-year veteran named Patricia Dominguez, recognized the numbers immediately as GPS coordinates. She entered them into the department's mapping system and found that they corresponded to a location on Flaming Gorge, approximately 14 miles south of the town of Green River, a narrow cove on the western shore, accessible only by boat. The letter was logged as evidence and forwarded to the Detective Division. Within 48 hours, a team was dispatched to investigate. The cove was difficult to reach. The access required navigating through a series of tight channels where the canyon walls rose nearly vertical from the water. Sonar readings showed the depth at the coordinates to be approximately 63 feet, not exceptionally deep for Flaming Gorge, but deep enough that anything on the bottom would be invisible from the surface. The water temperature, even in March, was barely above freezing. Divers entered the water on March 18th. Visibility was poor, perhaps 8 feet in the murky green light that filtered down from above. The bottom was silt and scattered rock, accumulated sediment from decades of seasonal runoff. The divers worked in a grid pattern, moving slowly, feeling their way across the lake floor. At approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, a diver named Marcus Riley found the watch. It was a woman's wristwatch, silver-toned with a rectangular face and a delicate link band. The crystal was intact, but clouded with mineral deposits. The hands were stopped at 3:17. Whether morning or afternoon, there was no way to determine. The watch was partially buried in silt, as though it had rested there for years, undisturbed until Riley's gloved hand brushed against it. The divers continued searching for another 6 hours over 2 days. They found nothing else, No clothing, no jewelry, no bones, no vehicle, no evidence that anyone had ever been at that location except for the watch, alone on the bottom of a cove that appeared on no recreational map and bore no name. The watch was sent to the Wyoming State Crime Laboratory in Cheyenne for analysis. Technicians were able to remove the backplate and access the interior mechanism. The movement was Swiss-made, consistent with mid-range timepieces manufactured between 1975 and 1985. There were no identifying marks, no engraving, no serial number that could be traced to a specific retailer or purchaser. The crystal and band were tested for biological material. None was found. If the watch had been worn by a living person when it entered the water, any trace of that person had long since been erased. The letter itself yielded even less. Forensic examination found no fingerprints, no DNA, no fibers or residues that could identify the sender. The paper was standard 20-pound copy stock, available at any office supply store. The pen was a common ballpoint, likely blue or black, producing no distinctive marks. The handwriting was analyzed and found to be consistent with a right-handed adult, but no match was found in any database. The postmark remained the most troubling detail. Postal investigators examined the envelope under magnification and determined that the location stamp, though partially obscured, was consistent with the format used by the Linwood Post Office, a small facility that had served the community of Linwood, Utah, on the southern shore of Flaming Gorge. The Linwood Post Office had closed in 1987. Investigators contacted the United States Postal Service for clarification. The USPS confirmed that the Linwood facility had been decommissioned more than 30 years earlier, its equipment removed, and its postmark dies destroyed. There was no mechanism by which a letter could have been legitimately stamped with a Linwood postmark in 2019. And yet the letter existed. The postmark existed. The envelope had traveled through the modern postal system and arrived at its destination, bearing the mark of a post office that had not operated since Ronald Reagan was president. The investigation expanded to include a search for matching missing persons cases. Detectives reviewed records from Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho, looking for any woman reported missing in the Flaming Gorge area whose disappearance remained unsolved. They found several. The reservoir had claimed lives before, but none matched the circumstances suggested by the letter. The cases that fit geographically had been resolved. The cases that remained open had no connection to this location. A broader search, encompassing all missing women in the four-state region between 1975 and 2019, produced hundreds of names. Detectives attempted to cross-reference these with any known connection to Flaming Gorge. Vacation records, fishing licenses, property ownership, family ties. The work took months. It produced nothing conclusive. The letter's author remained anonymous. The woman referenced in the confession, her, remained unidentified. The watch sat in an evidence locker, its hands frozen at 3:17, marking a moment that no one could place in time. In January of 2020, a retired postal worker named Eugene Crandall contacted the sheriff's office after reading about the case in a regional newspaper. Crandall had worked at the Linwood Post Office from 1981 until its closure in 1987. He examined photographs of the postmark and confirmed that it appeared authentic. "That's our stamp," he said. "I used it 1,000 times. The wear pattern on the L, that's exactly how it looked in 86, 87, just before we shut down." When asked how a letter could bear that postmark 32 years after the office closed, Crandall had no explanation. "The dies were supposed to be destroyed," he said. "That's standard procedure. You don't leave postmark equipment floating around, but I can tell you what I see, and what I see is a Linwood stamp. Whether that's possible or not, I can't say." He paused, then added, "There were stories back then about the lake, about things that didn't come back. We used to joke that Flaming Gorge kept what it took, but nobody really laughed. The case remains open. The watch remains in evidence. The letter remains in a file, its 2 lines offering a confession without context, an apology without explanation, coordinates without a crime. Detectives have visited the cove 3 more times since the initial dive. Each time, they have found nothing. The silt on the bottom shows no disturbance. The water holds no further secrets, or if it does, it has chosen not to reveal them. The woman whose watch stopped at 3:17 in the morning has never been identified. The person who wrote the letter has never been found. The post office that stamped the envelope has not existed for more than 3 decades. Some confessions cannot be understood because the crime they describe has been erased from every record except the conscience of the person who committed it. Some apologies arrive from places that no longer exist, written by hands that leave no prints, sent through systems that should not function. And some coves at the bottom of cold reservoirs hold evidence of things that happened in the dark at 3:17 in the morning, to women whose names have been forgotten by everyone except the person who could not bring them back. The coordinates are real. The watch is real. The sorrow in those 7 words, "I'm sorry I couldn't bring her back," is real. Everything else is silence and deep water and a postmark from a ghost town on the shore of a lake that keeps what it takes.